All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Innu Cree, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. My name is Marla Billinghurst. I will be chairing the panel this afternoon. With me on the panel today are Mr. Jerry Arnell and Ms. Valerie Warehan. The secretary today is Ms. Crystal Harland, and the City of Winnipeg assessor is Ms. Svetlana Scheibel. To the Zoom participants of the hearing, please note you are placed in the waiting room until your property is called upon. When it is your turn, you will be admitted into the meeting. Kindly follow along on the City of Winnipeg's Board of Revision YouTube channel for the hearing process. Once the host admits you into the hearing, please close or mute your YouTube player. You will then be permitted to speak with respect to your property, and once your hearing has concluded, you may leave the meeting. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council, and it is independent of it and the City administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony, followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. And once all of the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today, and the session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We will be hearing items 1, 4, and 6 through 8 on our docket today. Mrs. Harland, please affirm the assessor's and the applicant's testimony.
Yes, Madam Chair. Madam Applicant, would you please state your full name? Madam Assessor, would you please state your full name?
Svetlana Scheibel.
Thank you. Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Mr. Applicant, would you please state your full name?
Rod Slaughter.
Thank you. Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Madam Chair, would you like me to swear Mr. Story in at this point, or should we wait?
Will he be dealing with the first matter today? Sorry, I can't.
Mr. Slaughter, are you dealing with the first matter, or is Mr. Story?
Sorry, I don't have the agenda in front of me. The first matter is which property?
Oh, sorry. The first matter is 153 Lombard Avenue.
That'll just be me. Thank you.
Okay. So then we can swear in Mr. Story after. Before we get started then on the first matter, I do have one question. It says that your application is for liability to taxation, amount of assessed value, and classification of property. Are you appealing all three today?
No, I'd like to withdraw the classification and liability appeals, please.
Okay, classification and liability. So we'll only be dealing with the amount of assessed value?
Correct. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry, just wanted to clarify that. All right, so we can begin then with number 1 on this afternoon's docket, 153 Lombard Avenue. Ms. Scheibel, please proceed when you are ready.
File number 24-1740, roll number 130, 60705-000. We assess 2025 assessment with reference day April 1st, 2023 at 24,236,000. The subject property office building, 11th floor building, original built in 1906, with effective years built 1960. It stay on land area of 41,844 square feet, land area 28,963 square feet, basement area 37,728 square feet, gross floor area 356,333 square feet, and leasable area under assessment assessed 247,421 square feet. On page number 2, income expenses Miller provided for us that showed that overall net lease are around $11.90 per square foot. How I deliver it, it's based income multiplied by 12 months, monthly income multiplied by 12 months and divide by provided leasable area. On page number 3, the subject property located in downtown. Photo, street view, and air photo started on page number 3 through 4, 5, and 6. The subject property has zoning character sector C, intent to encourage and compatible, fine grained mix of uses rather than separation of uses in this diverse area. The build form is key in this sector, ranging from the compact massing of exchange district to the monumental stone building near the legislation building, to the endangered variety of building and structure at the forks. Urban design review is tend to reinforce the value of pure and built form, including enhanced pedestrian comfort. On page number 7, I presented comparables for exchange district where subject property located for same building class D. You can see that my first comparable to 913 Notre Dame, building built in 1912, lease from 2021 at $17.85. Comparable 35 King on 5th floor, rent for $10.70. On 35 King Street, basement and first floor rent from $21.95 for 9.4 thousand square feet. Two comparables on Lombard. This building built in 1906. Comparable as lease in 2020 for over 76,000 square feet at $15.30. Comparable on 5th floor for 3.3 thousand square feet at $16 per square foot. My comparables on 460 Main Street, 4th floor, building 1909, lease started in 2020 for 1.6 thousand square feet at $11.25. In my comparables on 123 Bannatyne on 3rd floor, lease started in 2022 for 4.4 thousand square feet, $10.82. So my average or mean $14.76. My median $15.30. On page number 8 through 911 assessment, our income market income. On page number 10, we can see that we assess 247,421 square feet with overall $10.21. That very well supported by my comparable give us over 2.5 million total income. We apply for this type of building, Class D, across this downtown, $14 per square foot vacancy loss. Expenses not recoverable, 3%, and shortfall $8 per square foot for vacant space. So this parameter we apply for building Class D across each building to be consistent. It give us net operating income $1,829,828. Model generate capitalization rate of 7.55%, give us estimate value of $24,236,000. On following page 13, we have capitalization rate table showed City of Winnipeg range of capitalization rate between 20 percentile and 80 percentile. It's 60% of the property for downtown A and B between 5.9 and 7%. Model generates 7.55%. It's aligned with downtown property for Collier 6 to 7, CBRE 6.5 to 8, and Cushman and Wakefield between 5.25 to 8.5. On page number 15, started income expenses Miller provided to us. You can see that net rental income on page 16 over 2.3 million. On page number 18 through 19, its leases exist as a building. Keep going to page on page 35. You can see the amount on page 35. We're looking on last tables. On bottom, we can see commercial rent for 1 month, $179,806. And we can see occupied space, total area of 247,251, occupied only 181,263. How I came across my estimation of overall net rent in the subject property, $11.90, by using this actual number. On page 36, it's my air photo and street view of my rent comparables. Let's look quickly on them. My 213 Notre Dame Avenue 9th floor rent for $17.85, 11th floor building, original building 1912. On page 37, 35 King basement area and first floor rent for $21.95, around 9.4 thousand square feet. On page 36, 37 Broadway Avenue, Lombard Avenue, rent over 76,000 square feet and $15.30. On page 39, 460 Main Street, 4th floor, building built original 1909, 4th floor building, lease started in 2012, 20 for $11.25. My last comparables on 123 Bannatyne, 3rd floor, 4th floor building, built original 1900, lease in 2022 for 4,400 around square feet at $10.82. 2025 property assessment notes following. So based on evidence in analysis, the April 1st, 2023 market value of subject property, $24,236,000. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Mr. Slaughter, do you have any questions for the assessor?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mrs. Shable. I'd just like to start, the effective age on your page 1. Did you have a chance to inspect the property?
Ms. Chair, although I have not inspected it, the subject property, I am able to completely accurately describe it based on the data we have on the file.
Okay, thank you. So the original age you mentioned was 1906. I'm just curious then, how did we determine the effective age of 1960?
So usually a subject office building can be half-life of 60, 70 years maximum. If we don't apply, because this building is half good maintained, we have to increase effective years built to be consistent. So income approach model would work for us.
So there's not a formula at all. It's more of a subjective opinion, I guess. Is that correct?
Just to estimate effective years built, yes, it's our opinion. Each assessor has own opinion.
Okay.
Like an agent.
Thank you. And you're aware that the property is a heritage property. It's designated Heritage 2.
Correct.
Does that have any effect on the value, in your opinion?
Its effect on rent selected by model and plus capitalization rate. It's outside 16% of the properties. Much higher.
Okay. The vacancy allowance that you've applied on page 10 of your evidence is 14%. Can you explain how that calculation was derived?
We have a statistical model that crunch all information provided for us by the owner. And our statistical data showed that Class D buildings average $14, 14% vacancy, what we apply across whole on top of this building, Class D. It's statistical data, yes.
Okay, but we don't have that in evidence. We don't have any evidence to show that the Class D vacancy is.
It's more model driven. It's statistical data. It's too complicated to go in to explain.
And you mentioned the subject property's actual vacancy. So that's also taken into consideration when a vacancy allowance is applied?
Yes, because this vacancy, it's across whole building. It can be 0% vacancy, but we still allowed 40% of vacancy to build some for future vacancy would happen.
Yeah,
because
but
usually lease 10, 15 years, it's tenants can leave and come new. So this 40% give some buffer for future vacancy more higher.
In reviewing the subject's actual vacancy, you're aware that it has not been below 25% since 2018. Is that correct?
It's for all this type of building Class D, only 14%. 25% vacancy, if you apply in income approach, it shows that building completely empty. If you, for income approach, you apply over 25%, model doesn't work anymore. Income approach doesn't make sense anymore.
Yeah, I understand that there's a maximum allowance that could be applied. I'm just curious on how the 14% was derived when we admit that we look at actual, but the actual has not been below 25% for 4 years. We don't see any evidence of Class D vacancy, but I can suggest that there are market reports that would suggest a much higher vacancy. We don't see that in your evidence. Is that correct?
No, market report showed this, but our data, our 40% from statistical data for information provided to us.
Thank you. You mentioned on page 17 that you had the income and expense mailer from the owner.
Correct.
And you mentioned the net operating income. Now, first off, this is the year-end 2023 statement. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, it's
Okay,
post
so-
reference, sorry.
Yeah, and our reference date is April 2023. Okay.
Correct,
But-
catch, sorry.
On page 17, you indicated the NOI, and it's a little hard to read, but I believe it says 848,000. Is that correct?
Something over 18,000, 800,000.
It's hard to see the numbers exactly, but you'd agree that that number, which is hovering in the 800,000, I think, is significantly less than the net operating income that you've calculated for the property as of April 23, which on page 12 is 1,829,828. That's significantly higher than the actual NOI. Is that correct?
Correct, but when we estimate using income approach, we apply potential income on the market and we take out not recoverable expenses. We cover it for a shortfall. It says how much costs to keep a vacant space and vacancy. So
Yeah,
in this net operating income has some expenses that landlord put in building to generate this income. It's not part income approach.
Yeah, and
And
I
we can
agree.
see some interest. So it's not part of income approach. So it is net income will be much higher if you take the amortization, recovery operation cost. So it's not part income approach. What we look, we need to look recoveries. Look, operating property tax management fee, it's recovered from tenants, so it's net leases.
Yeah, so I agree that what I just cited would be the least fee performance, and we're doing a fee simple analysis, but part of a fee simple analysis is to recognize performance in the subject property as well. And I would suggest to you that there's nothing in that calculation of net operating income that is not admissible as recoverable expenses for income approach. Like that is the actual net operating income. And so I just wanted to ascertain that you agree that there is quite a delta between the applied NOI of 1,830,000, I believe, and what you're citing here is the net operating income of 848,000.
Because this net income from subject property from owner showed some capital investment. It's not part of income approach.
No,
They showed some bank interest, some amortization. It's not part income approach.
Yeah, I've had that
If you look
concern
net
raised.
income 2.3 million, if you look on our assessment, it's 2.5 million. After vacancy, 2.1 million. So it's aligned with subject property income expense Miller provided for us.
So, Ms. Shavel, if I'm to understand your concern, is one of the expense items, and Madam Chair, this is all on page 17. One of the expense items is recoverable principal amortization for capital, which is 438,000. So I assume, Ms. Shavel, what you're saying is we need to add that back in your mind
We
to
have to
$1.2 million.
add it, yes.
But I will disagree with you, Ms. Shavel, because in fact, you are aware that by stating that is a recoverable expense, that is recoverable. In other words, there's revenue that is offsetting that expense. It's above the line. It's a recoverable expense. Just because it has the word capital in it does not mean it's recoverable.
No, we have expenses maintain property and we have capitalization expenses. It's completely two different expenses. It is
Exactly
recoverable
right.
Amortization capital over 440,000. Have to plus this plus to net income provided to us. Amortization recoverable operating cost over 20,000 should be added to it. It will become what we estimate.
Okay, so there's 2 points about that. Number one, even if we did add it, which is wrong, because then we'd be counting recoverable income with no expense to offset. But if we did, we would have an NOI then of $1.2 million, which is still drastically different and less than what is applied by the city, correct?
8,000 plus 100,000. It gives us 1.4 million.
Okay.
If we just add his amortization stuff and our net operating income, 1.8 million. But
Yeah,
here include
significantly higher.
also a renovation. It's not part income approach. They include interest charged by bank. It's not income approach.
Sure, I'll
Yeah.
discuss that in my direct then, Madam Chair, because that's we have a different opinion on that item. So the last question, Ms. Schabel, is about the capitalization rate that's applied. You submit evidence on page 13 of the conclusions of the city and market reports.
Correct.
And you agree that on page 13, there isn't a category for Class C or Class D office. It's only A and B. Is that correct?
Correct. This information align with Kohler CBRE Cushman Wakefield, what they provide. Downtown ATB, with our table showed, to be consistent, what provided outside sources. But in our data, we have Class C and D, what model generate. We have our statistical data.
And on this page 13, the outside sources that you cite, the market reports, they have a range in cap rates for Class B, and it goes up to 8.5%. Is that correct? In the last category, the high end?
Yes.
Yeah. Would you agree that Class C would typically have a higher capitalization rate than a Class B?
Not every time.
Okay, and you also, I guess, then wouldn't agree that a Class D would have a higher cap rate than Class C?
Not.
No, okay. That is all my questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Arnell, do you have any questions for the assessor?
Yeah, with the fact that it's designated heritage, would that affect the cap rate at all? Like your cap rate on your model?
Yes, it's taken into consideration.
It is taken into consideration?
Yes. Because all Class D building, most of the time heritage, because it's over 100 years old.
Okay,
And
that's the only question I
I
had.
say, office building can be stand without any improvement 60, 70 years only. And we have to demolish and build new.
Okay, that's the only question I had. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Warren, do you have any questions for the assessor?
Mine was just answered. It had to do with the cap rate also, but thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. My questions have been answered as well. So, Mr. Slaughter, please proceed with your presentation when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll refer to our main evidence, Altus brief for 153 Lombard. And for brevity, I won't go through too much of the description of the property. Ms. Schabel has described it well. Page 6 and 7, we also have some photographs and description of the improvements. I have had a chance to go through the property in the past. I know it quite well. It's an 11-story building. It was originally built in 1906. It's on Lombard Avenue and Rory. The gross building area is 356,333 square feet, but the leasable, as stated by Ms. Schabel, is 247,421. And it is designated as a Grade 2 heritage building. And this does have an effect on the ability for the owner to improve or renovate the building. Typically, it translates into higher expenses. So we have done an income approach, Madam Chair, and it starts on page 11. I'll just give a bit of background on how we approach our analysis, starting with the market rents. So as alluded to in the questions with the assessor, we are valuing the property in the fee simple, which means we look to market as well as actual performance. At the top of page 11, I cite the Real Estate Investment Analysis and Advanced Income Approach textbook, which states that the rent that a property would market rent is defined as the rent that a property would most probably command in the open market given reasonable exposure. It is indicated by the rents paid as per the recently signed arm's length leases. We go further down where we cite the Appraisal of Real Estate, 3rd edition, and they state, An important initial task for an appraiser who is valuing the fee simple interest in a leased property is to determine whether the lease rents are representative of market rents and whether adjustments are required to the property rents of the overall capitalization rate to reflect market conditions. And then further, we have a very specific board order on the Richardson building from the Manitoba Municipal Board. And they had stated that the board notes in this case that 20 leases were executed in 1984 and 85, the reference date at this time being 85. In the board's view, this direct evidence gives a more reliable indicator of the 1985 market rent than does the Dawson report, which was a separate third-party market report, of evidence of the rent paid in other office buildings. The use of these rental rates as opposed to rental rates in other office buildings overcomes the need to make adjustments for differences in location, age, amenities, etc. between the subject and comparison properties. What I'm trying to do, Madam Chair, is lay the foundation as an appraiser of how we approach market rent. It does not mean you ignore actual performance. You need to look to the rents in the property first, as the texts guide us, and then determine, are these at market? There's many reasons why something may not be at market, and you make a decision then to adjust. This is where the market evidence of other buildings comes into play. You have to make sure that you're looking at the net contribution. Very tricky when we're considering Class C and D office buildings, because many times, I would say 50% of the time, the rents that are attained in these types of properties are not triple net. They are typically, or not typically, but about 50% of the time, they may be semi-gross or gross. And I'll show you some examples of that. On page 12, we go further into the review of appraisal texts to determine how we are to approach the concept of market rent. So again, we start with actual rents in the property, determine if they're at market, make adjustments when necessary. A second thing we must consider is, if you noted, the language that is used in those textbooks refers to recent. So we do not want to be swayed by rents that are dated, especially when we have a market that has been in fluctuation like we have had recently. Because the marketplace in, let's call it pre-2018, was very different than the marketplace that we're facing today. And a rent that was negotiated pre-2018 may have been a more optimistic outlook at a time that was more of a landlord's market rather than a tenant's market as we have today. Further to that, rents that have stepped up can be misleading, because the meeting of the minds in those cases might hypothetically have been in the past, let's say in 2015, at a time when the market was more of a landlord's market. And the rent escalation that was determined at that time is prescribed in the lease. So it's based on the assumptions of the parties back in 2015 of what might happen in the future, which can be drastically different than what actually happens in the future. So we need to take caution when we look at older leases or leases that have stepped up. Another concern that is very common with looking at market rents as a determination of the market rent for a subject property in lieu of actual is that oftentimes we can have rents which are inflated by landlord investment into what we call tenant improvements, tenant improvement allowance. So a tenant may be willing to take a space. The landlord might have it listed for $14 a square foot net, but the tenant says, we would like X, Y, and Z done to the space before we move in, or maybe they would like it turnkey. They'd like it completely fitted to their needs. The landlord will take those costs and often amortize them into the final rent. So rather than $14 a square foot over, say, a 5-year term, we might end up at $17 or $18 because of the inflated improvements into the rent. That's very important when we're comparing apples to apples to try and see if one rent is indicative of a space for the subject property. So we consider all of this background as we go in and analyze both the subject properties leases and the market. And a starting point for the market, Madam Chair, we often look to what are the asking rents. Now, off the top, an asking rent, especially in a tenant's market, is going to be higher than what the landlord can actually attain. The delta, in my estimation, is often 10 to 20% between the asking rent and what can be attained. On page 13, we look to the 5 major broker reports to determine what the asking rents are for this category. When I say this category, it doesn't actually exist in broker reports. Class D is blended in with Class C. So please note that we're considering something that is theoretically even less than some of the asking rents cited here by the broker reports. But they cite that the asking rent might be between $12.75 a square foot to about $14 a square foot. So this is important because as soon as we see a rent that might be above that, which is possible, you can have rents below that, you can have rents above that, but there's usually a reason. And the reason should be considered by an appraiser if you're going to use that as an indication of market rent for a different property. Some of the reasons I cited, there might be tenant improvements inflated in, it might be a non-arm's length lease, et cetera, et cetera. So again, Class C, which in this case includes Class D, is cited to have asking rents, which create the ceiling, between $12.75 and $14 a square foot. And if we consider a delta of 10 to 20%, we're looking at something in the low teens, probably between $10 to $12 a square foot. Now, what has been happening in the office market in Winnipeg since 2018? I use that date, Madam Chair, because I especially this cycle, this assessment cycle, I find that when we look back to the performance in Winnipeg from 2009 to 18, it was a renaissance for downtown office. There was a lot of excitement. We had the Winnipeg Jets returning, the convention center expansion, the museum, and we had what we'll call a strong market. In 2018, things started to change a little bit, and it was simply because the supply-demand balance started to shift a little bit. On the one side, on the demand side, we saw very, very few what I'll call net new tenancies to the downtown. What we did find is an increase in supply, mainly because of True North in 2018. And what that did is start kind of almost a musical chairs of tenancies moving, generally up. There was a flight to quality to fill the gap that was opened by True North coming on the market. So this began a pressure on especially the lower classes, the Bs, the Cs, and the Ds, as the decreased demand meets the increased supply and a flight to quality. Then, of course, we had the pandemic. And the pandemic, had many effects, but one from afar might say, well, office was not affected. Well, that's because the leases were not affected because the leases extended through. But what was happening through the pandemic was a change in work dynamic, where you had more occupants of space in downtown offices working from home. And we started to see the effects as the pandemic ended, theoretically, depending on when you say it ended, it might not have ended yet. And we started to see the significant increase in vacancies. And we started to see what's called ghost vacancies. You'll hear that term a lot in the market. And that is basically tenants who are no longer in the space, but their lease is still in place. So theoretically, it's still occupied. But once the lease term comes up, generally we know what's going to happen. So now we started to see further effects on demand while supply had increased. And we entered into what is very typically called a tenant's market, where rents started to not necessarily decrease. I'll quote this from the Collier's Winnipeg office report in Q1 21. They stated, in general terms, rental rates remain relatively flat, but lease inducements have increased, compressing net effective rents. So while you may see trying to hold ground on the face rents, behind the scenes, landlords are spending more and more money. And the net effectives, which isn't contemplated in our approach, but is certainly contemplated in market behavior, they are decreasing. And at the same time, we saw vacancies increase. So thank you. That was a long preamble that will form the basis of all of our market rent discussions today, and I'll only say it once. So that's the background of what's happening in downtown Winnipeg. Now, we look to market rents for Class C and D, and this is on page 14. And again, this is laying the foundation of market. We're going to come to the site specific in a moment. We've looked at a number of leases, 39, in various properties throughout the downtown Winnipeg that are fairly comparable to the subject. There are photographs, Madam Chair, in our appendix that I'll allow the board to peruse at your convenience, starting on page 22. But there are a number of properties here of varying quality, Class Cs and Ds. And basically, the average of all of these rents comes to $10.20. Now recall, I said that on the Class C, there was asking rents from $12.75 to $14, but you're going to have a delta to what can actually be attained. I should also mention that all of these leases are recent for the reason that I mentioned. We can't be swayed or have our conclusions changed by looking too far into the past. So these are leases that commenced in 2019 to Q1 23. And some of them include step-ups if it's a newer lease. So we think this is a valid subset of all of the new leases in Class C and D, again, averaging $10.20. The Class C is a little higher. Typically, it goes 12 to 14, and the Class D will be typically at $9 or $10 a square foot. The subject property. Again, if we go back to the language in the municipal board decisions and the appraisal texts, we need to look at most recent leases to get a determination of how the property is performing. So on the bottom of page 15, we have the most recent leases for new tenancies. This isn't step-ups, it's not renewals, this is new tenancies. They range from a low of $375, and these will be the net rents, not net effective, but the net rents. So which means if they were a gross or semi-gross rent, part of our analysis is to reduce those to what the net contribution is. From $375 up to $11 a square foot. One is at $17.50. That's the highest one. And again, I mentioned before, you're going to have quite a variance in the rents that you'll see, but there's usually a reason. And in this case, the reason is it's a very, very short-term lease for a very small space of only 294 square feet. So it is an outlier. But if I may, Madam Chair, I'll show you on the rent roll the factors that we look at to determine that, in fact, a rent may or may not be net. So for the very first comparison that I show here, or not comparison, but the subject lease, it's Unit 100 at $9.50, commencing in January 21. If I could please ask you to turn to page 65, which is the year-end 2022 rent roll for the subject property. At the very bottom of page 65, you will see this tenant, and you will see the starting date in January 21. As we move across the page, the leasable area of 8,069 square feet. And then we keep going across, and you'll see 5 rows, which are the rent and additional rents. The first item is op est, so that's the op cost, basically. And we follow across to the second last column. We will see that that is $13.07. These are the recoverable costs that the tenant pays. Please let me pause for a moment. There is a discussion in the questioning of the assessor about the net operating income. And the assessor was saying, well, hang on, there's an item here of $400,000 for recoverable capital costs. These are capital, we have to ignore them. That is false, Madam Chair. And I've gone through this many times now on various office buildings. These are recoverable expenses. These are basically expenses that are capital in nature in that they are fixing something that will last more than 1 year, but they are recoverable. And that's contemplated in the lease. So what is important about that is the word recoverable trumps the word capital. This does not mean it's a capital expense which is below the line. Secondly, there is a offsetting revenue that's in the income, which matches that recoverable expense. So if you were to take out the recoverable expense but leave the revenue, you have a skewed income. You must leave it in. That's why it is in. Otherwise, it would be fraudulent for the owner to present that as a recoverable expense. And that, now coming back to page 65 of my evidence, is why we see an op cost that is relatively high, $13.07 a square foot without taxes, without management. That is rather high. But that's the reality of the property. It's an older property. It has many things that need to be fixed. Those things that need to be fixed come at higher cost because it's heritage. These become the recoverable expenses that were referred to, and they are shown and borne in the recoverable revenue. 1307. We go down the next line. It says com rent. And we go across and it's $9. That's the rent. That's the net rent. We then see management, 73 cents a square foot, and we see taxes at $2.02 a square foot. As an appraiser, I look at these numbers, I determine that they total $15.82 a square foot, I believe. I determine that that is representative of the actual recoverable expenses, and therefore I can ascertain that this rent is net. That's what you have to do. You cannot assume that any rent in this property is net. You have to take this exercise. If I may, please ask you to turn 2 pages forward to page 67. You will see a lease for a tenant which occupies 75,000. So this is the main tenant in the building, about a fifth of the building. This is the federal government. As a rule of thumb, not always, but generally, provincial and federal tenants will be on a semi-gross or gross basis. That's a flag. As soon as you see a tenancy like this, you have to pay attention. Ms. Schabel cited this rent as one of her comparisons, and she said is net. It's close, but not quite. We follow along the top category, we see the rent, and it's $15.30. That was cited in Ms. Schabel's evidence. But as we go down, we will see op costs. They are less than the $13.07 I mentioned before. They're $12.07. And this is because the federal government has said in their lease, we will not pay escalations. We'll pay a base year for op costs. And if the op costs go up, that's too bad. You pay it. We don't. And the same thing we see on the management, which is about half, or sorry, taxes, which is less than the typical as well. This is the exercise we must do to determine if a rent is net, semi-gross, or gross. And if it is one of those two latter categories, we have to bring the rent back to net. If they are not recovering approximately $1.26 of expenses, that is a loss to the owner. So the $15.30 rent is actually $1.26 less than that. That is the net. That's the exercise. I could go on and on with all the different rents, but this is the exercise that we go through. And if I could ask you now to turn to page 16. You will see a summary of the conclusions of that exercise, where every rent is examined and the net is determined. And we then say to ourselves, is this representative of market for this property? And in some cases, we'll say no. In most cases, we say yes. In some cases, the rent is very, very low. For example, Bergman's has a restaurant on the 8th floor. They pay a gross rent of $12. That's less than the operating costs. It's a negative net rent. We're not applying a negative net rent. We apply a market rent to that. These are the reasons that the fee simple analysis can often be far higher than the least fee, because we're making these adjustments. We also apply market rents to all the vacant space. Recall, 26% of this property is vacant. So we apply $10 a square foot based on our analysis of market rents to the vacant or space requiring adjustment, and $5 to any storage units, which are relatively minor. And it's very hard to read this page, Madam Chair, I know, but it comes to a conclusion, and I want to be very clear about this for the panel. It comes to a conclusion that is higher than what the city has applied. Our blended market rent after that full analysis is actually $11.34, which is quite a bit higher than what the city has used. But that is an appropriate way to value the property in the fee simple. So thank you. That was a very long-winded explanation on how we approach market rents. I'm not going to go through this again today, but that lays the foundation. And our conclusion is a higher rent than what the city has applied. Now, where the differences lie, why I'm here, because I wouldn't be here otherwise, is on all the other items. Number one.
Okay.
Number one is vacancy allowance. The city has stated that they're applying 14% as the vacancy allowance. Now, nobody has the exact formula of how vacancy allowances are determined. We know two things. We know that we never apply zero, because any investor is going to expect over the life of the property they will incur vacancy. So the minimum vacancy we will find is going to be above zero. And for offices, maybe it's 6% or so. The maximum vacancy allowed by the city, not necessarily by the board, but by the city, is 25%. The market vacancy allowance will lie somewhere in between that. Now, the city is saying that they're relying on market, not site-specific evidence, because I have already told you, and I'll show you again, that the vacancy for this property hasn't been under 25% since 2018. But they say, no, but that doesn't matter. We're looking at market, 14%. Okay, well, where does the 14% come from? Internal models. Okay, do you have that in evidence? No, because that internal model conclusion contradicts what we see in our market evidence. I cite again the 5 major broker reports that we talked about in the asking rents. And they have conclusions for Class C. Again, this implies C's and D's category, which means that we have a higher grade of property as well as the subject property's D class. And their conclusions for Class C vacancy range from a low, I'm not sure how this one is so low, 12.2% by Cushman, to a high of 22.4% for Capital. And that's actually closer to what we see because we represent a lion's share of these properties. The average, though, even if we included the low, is 17% across the average of the broker conclusions, I mean. There is nothing here that suggests that 14% is appropriate for Class D, because remember, this is Class C and D. So I suggest from a market standpoint, if that's the basis of the conclusion of a vacancy allowance, it's flawed. The market vacancy for Class C and D is higher. And for the reasons I mentioned before when I was talking about market rent, there's a flight to quality. People are vacating these types of buildings. Now, do we look to just market or do we look also to site-specific performance? And I think there's a very relevant municipal board decision, rather recent, on this item or on this issue, which is for the property at 75 Scurfield. It's an industrial property, but the logic holds the same. And I'll quote, well, I'll give you the background first. The property had been hovering at around 50% vacancy, and then it dropped to 37.8% vacancy just before the reference date. And the owner had suggested that we should have a maximum vacancy allowance, not 50. You know, we're not saying actual, but something that more reflects the difference between our actual performance and market. So they suggested 25. And the board, I'll quote the board's decision, the board will follow the precedent set by the board that the board cannot ignore actual vacancy rates in making a valuation of income. And this has also been cited in some very strong precedent decisions regarding 325 Broadway, the municipal board, where they state, the board in prior orders has been quite consistent that site-specific values must be determined. If a site-specific situation shows that a vacancy rate is clearly different from the normal rate, then the board is justified in using a vacancy rate that reflects the actual situation. So we have to look at actual. But if actual is 0, of course, we don't use 0. There's a minimum amount too. So it's something in between on both ends. The subject property, and you'll see at the bottom of page 18, has been hovering around 27% for the last 3 years. 25% over the last 5 years, far greater than 14%. So our market is arguably 17%. Our actual is 25. How do we conclude 14? It has to be somewhere between 17% and 25% based on the decisions of the board and the behavior in the market. We have applied the bottom end of that scale, 17%. So that's the number one difference between the notwithstanding that we have a higher rent, we have a higher vacancy as well. The second is a minor issue, Madam Chair. It's on page 19. The shortfall rate, which represents the amount of recoverable expenses that the owner will lose if the space is vacant. So it's tied directly to the vacancy and it's tied directly to the actual expenses in the property. Recall, I mentioned that the actual expenses were $15.85, I think, at the reference date. So we've increased our shortfall rate to $14 a square foot. Non-recovered expenses is something that we've talked a lot about in the past. We have changed course on that. We are just trying to make sure that any risks, or any increased expenses that might be incurred for leasing costs, non-recovered expenses, are reflected in the cap rate. As long as your methodology for determining your cap rate is consistent with how you value the property, it doesn't really matter what you put in the non-recovered expenses. It'll be borne in the cap rate. Which brings us to the last item, is capitalization rate. The city has applied 7.55%. I am about to veer away from this presentation, Madam Chair, into our capitalization rate study, which is a different study, but I'll just give a preamble first. 7.55% is not at all appropriate when you see the market evidence. Again, the city has only cited market reports, but they show a range of about 6.5 to 8.5% for Class B. And I asked this question of the assessor, but I can tell you the answer. Class C and D are going to be higher than Class B for capitalization rates, typically. So if we have a range of 6.5 to 8.5 for Class B, let's say the average is 7.5, how can a Class D property be at 7.55? I will now ask if the panel could please turn to a supporting document called the capitalization rate study. We felt this deserves a separate document because there's a lot to talk about here, but I'm going to try and keep it short because I think everybody on this panel has heard us talk about this before. The capitalization rate is taking your year one stabilized income that we determined, that was the exercise that we've just gone through, and determining what rate of return the market will want to apply to that when they purchase the property. There are many factors that will influence the capitalization rate. Three of those items, and there's many items underneath these three main categories, are the likelihood of appreciation in the income that you've determined. So I now know what I'm supposed to earn in my year one. Do I think that's going to increase, stay the same, or decrease? And if it's going to decrease, my capitalization rate, my rate of return will have to increase. So my cap rate will go up if I think things are going to get worse. If the feeling in my stomach, the confidence I have about that income is not very strong, I will want a higher rate of return. Cap rate goes up. The second is what's happening in the overall market, supply demand. Are we looking at rosier skies ahead, or do we see that it's still going to be cloudy? This can also influence the capitalization rate. And the third is the cost of money. If it costs me more to borrow, remember about 75% of my purchase is going to be in debt, typically. If it costs me more to borrow, then I'm going to require a greater rate of return, which increases the capitalization rate. So I've talked a lot about what's happening in the downtown office market in Winnipeg. And basically, it's not a rosy picture. It's a picture that shows that as ghost vacancies become vacancies, and we're not seeing a lot of increased demand, and we actually have increasing supply with the Wawanesa Tower coming around the corner, this is not a very rosy picture. So everything is heading for capitalization rates increasing. But on top of that, since the last cycle, we have the influence of the cost of money. On page 7, when we look at the cost of money and the influence on capitalization rates, we start with what's the Bank of Canada doing? So last cycle, you're in the recession. It was April 21. And the Bank of Canada had forced the lending rate as low as possible to entice the economy. So everybody knew that was a temporary move. But it was at 0.25%. In 2022, we started to see inflation increasing. And the Bank of Canada then started increasing its overnight rate to slow things down. And they increased it drastically by 400 basis points. That's the starting point of a ripple effect that will eventually affect the capitalization rates. Because of the increase in the Bank of Canada rate, we saw the mortgage rates go up, which makes sense, right? The banks need to charge more now on their interest. Now we have increased borrowing costs. We turn to page 8, and we see what happens between the spread of capitalization rates and risk-free investments like bonds. And we can see, as on page 8, at the very end there, between 2020 and 22, as the bond rate shot up because of the Bank of Canada rate going up. It doesn't happen right away. It's not in tandem, but capitalization rates started to go up as well. In fact, Q1 2023 Collier's capitalization report for Canada, they state cap rates in Winnipeg have begun to increase due to the rising rate environment, which is consistent with other locations in Canada. Page 9. so we've seen the effect on overall cap rates. What's happening with office? Because theoretically, increasing borrowing costs need not increase a capitalization rate if the other factors offset that. If the appreciation likelihood of your asset is greater than the increase in borrowing costs, you could still see a decrease in cap rate, which is what we sometimes see on certain other asset classes to an extent. Not office. You mix a dire outlook with rising costs, your cap rates go up. And that is clear on page 9. From Q1 22 to Q1 23, cap rates have risen by approximately 100 basis points. 100 basis points. We have some language about the work from home. I'm not going to get into that, but that's one of the things that's only enhancing the effect on capitalization rates. So the Winnipeg office market, page 10. Collier's 2018 study started to show that we had concerns coming. This is back in the past, but it was laying the foundation that I described earlier. The office sector is expected to see some changes as we move through 2018. Tower 1 of True North Square continues to lease up during construction and is expected to complete in late 2018. The result of this additional office space will most likely be increased vacancy within the downtown and downward pressure for rental rates for Class A buildings located at Portage and Main. Cap rates are expected to remain steady during the coming quarter. That was in Q1 2018. Then we go through into the snapshots in Q1 23, and we see the vacancy going up even more. And in April 23, the capital office market snapshot of Q1 23 states, notable news in the quarter included Wawanesa Insurance putting its building at 200 Main Street up for sale, along with the nearby surface lot at 165 4th Street. They are currently preparing to move into their new downtown tower at True North Square in 2024. So increasing supply again. And then lastly, it stated that with higher interest rates remaining, elevated construction costs, and a relatively large amount of office vacancy on the market, landlords have begun 2023 by shifting their focus on updating and improving their office buildings as a way to attract more tenants back into the workplace. They're feeling the effects. They're feeling the effects of increased supply, decreased demand, and increasing borrowing rates. So that's the background. What's the summary? The broker reports shown on page 11 show exactly what we described, an increase in capitalization rates from the last cycle. Class A was hit hard. They went up by 50 to 150 basis points. Class B, 25 basis points to 125 basis points. And they don't even talk about Class C or D. So that's a large increase over last cycle. You can see at the bottom of page 11, the asset class in teal for office shoots right up because of the rising costs for borrowing. Now we look at what we have seen in our analysis. So we go and find, although there's not many, but recent sales of properties up until Q1 23. We don't look into the past too far. Before 2018, as I say, is a very different market. And we try and determine how close are the broker reports to what we're seeing. Now, very important point I'd like to stress to the panel. When we do this exercise, we make sure that our methodology in determining the capitalization rate is the same methodology we apply in valuing the subject property. You can ask 5 different appraisers, what's the cap rate on that sale? And you'll probably get 6 different answers, at least 5 different answers, because it all depends on what you're doing in your analysis to your stabilized year 1. But we have been consistent, and that's very important. I want to stress that. The very first sale that we look at is September 2022. It's a Class B office tower, strong covenant, mostly provincial tenancy, strong occupancy, strong rents, connected to the walkways. This is a very good property. 1974 age. It sold in September 22 for $25.5 million, significantly less than the asking price. The capitalization that we determined based on our methodology, which is market vacancy and market rents applied where contract is not at market, et cetera, 3% non-recovered expenses, appropriate shortfall, the same exercise we went through earlier for the subject property. The cap rate is 7.48%. I just described to you, and you'll see the picture on page 13, a very good Class B office tower, far superior to the subject property. That's a 7.48 cap rate. The city's applying 7.55 to the subject. The next property we looked at is also called a Class B. We actually call it a B minus or C plus. It had difficulty in performance, and it's very close to the first property. It's at 185 Carlton. And it was on the market and eventually sold for considerably less than asking, also in late 22, so very close to the reference date. And when we work that sale price of $6,750,000 through, we come up with a capitalization rate of 8.7%. 8.7% for something that is still, in my mind, superior and newer than the subject, connected to the walkways, across from convention center, etc. Next page. 433 Main. This is an anomaly in the Exchange District. It's a relatively newer tower on Main Street, built for CN originally in the 1970s. It had been experiencing difficulty in occupancy, and it was sold in 2019, actually to convert most of it into multi-res. But the point is, the sale price is somebody bought it as an office tower, it was marketed as an office tower, it was competing as an office tower, so it's a valid comparison. That capitalization rate was 8.18%. None of these properties are built in 1906. None of these properties have heritage designation. We have other comparisons, Madam Chair, but they're more for suburban offices. So I'll just go to page 19 where we come to our conclusions. This is looking at everything I talked about, kind of the background common sense of what's happening in the market, corroborating that with the broker reports, and finally testing that to our own analyses. And our conclusions are that Class A would be at about 6.75%, and B's are between 7.25 and 7.75. But C's would be 7.75 to 8.25%, and Class D's, which are typically the older and often heritage designated properties, would be 8.5 to 9.5%. In appendix, we have backgrounds on each of the sales we looked at, the market reports. I won't go through that right now, but it's there for the board should they wish to review. And I'll please ask you to turn back to the original brief for 153 Lombard, and we'll come to our conclusion. So I thank you, because that was a very long presentation, and we won't reiterate this as we go through this afternoon, but what it did is walk through our analysis of the fee simple performance for the NOI of the property, and then apply the appropriate capitalization rate. Now, why would the capitalization rate be higher? I mentioned a few reasons. This is an older building that's going to have a higher degree of expenses. It's an older building with a heritage designation that increases the risk for any potential purchaser, because they know that they are restricted in the things that you can do with that property. And lastly, the fee simple analysis that we've completed had an NOI, a net income, less than what the city had at 1.8 million. We come in at 1.663. We should never be confused by the least fee performance of a property when doing fee simple, but you certainly have to look at it and say, am I on the right track? And remember, the NOI of the property, the actual NOI is only about 895,000 in 22, and it dropped to 850,000 in 23 in the assessor's evidence. That's drastically less. What does that do for me as an investor saying, I hope to be able to have a 1.6 million income? It increases my uneasiness. It increases the risk, and it would translate into a higher capitalization rate. And that's why, for those reasons, I think 8.5 is actually probably on the low side for the capitalization rate for this property in this analysis with these conclusions. But applying 8.5% to our fee simple income results in a value of $19,576,000. In evidence, we have the supporting documentation on the rent rolls and income statements and the board decision I mentioned for vacancy, justifying that we can't ignore when the sustained vacancy of the property for 3 years is higher than market. But I'll leave that for the board's reference, and I will conclude there, asking the board to consider a revised value of $19,576,000. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ms. Shable, do you have any questions for Mr. Slaughter?
Yes, please. Open page 20 of Agent Bree.
Page 20.
Yes.
Okay.
What is your leasable area you assess?
The leasable rate, like the average rental rate?
No, leasable area.
Oh,
Did you
it's
analyze? Okay, sorry.
yeah, it's just under 1,000 square feet less because I'm going right off the rent roll. So it was 246,610.
So if you open page 89, 99 of your breach, we can see the total area 247,242, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I'm about just less than 1,000 square feet off. So I must have had I'm not exactly sure, Ms. Shable, but yeah, there's a bit of a variance there.
So you use a more higher rent, 1133 compared to our, but you want 70% vacancy.
Correct. So I'm higher on the market rent, but I'm higher on the vacancy, the shortfall, and the cap rate.
The best part that effective income 2.3 million. Our effective income 2.1 million. So you much higher.
Sorry, what was that number? The 2 point. I didn't
So
catch
you
that.
is after reducing area, in using higher rent and higher vacancy, you
Yeah.
still have 2.3 million effective income, correct?
Effective income. Yes, that's correct.
So, and our estimation, we have only 1.2 million, 2.2 million. So your effective income much higher.
Yeah, that's likely because of the higher market rent that we've applied.
So we 3%, it's not operating expenses. You use like management, okay? Your shortfall $14 per square foot
Yes.
on vacant space. I'm losing. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, I can.
Ms. Shable,
Yes, I'm here.
are you still there?
Yes.
Do you have any more
Okay,
questions?
1 second. Questions. Okay. We're going back to page. We're going to capitalization paper.
To the
Outlook
cap,
study.
you'd like me to refer to the capitalization report?
Yes.
Okay.
If you open page 7,
Yes.
we can see that our Bank of Canada benchmark interest 4.5%, correct? Your first graphs.
That's correct.
So on second graph on same page, you can see that from January to March, capitalization rate dropped to 5.5%, correct? If you look
Sorry, on
March
page
2020, page 7.
No, those aren't cap rates. Those are just various mortgage
Mortgage
rates and bond
rates,
rates.
yes, to
Yeah.
bonds of Canada. So size January 2023 to reference day 2023 March, it's dropping for 1%, correct?
The mortgage rate dropped slightly. Yeah, there's going to be reasons for variations, but the general trend is that they're increasing,
So it
which
was
makes
dropped
sense.
from 6.5% to 5.5% in March already. So it's tendency mortgage rate or to government of Canada bond going down, correct?
Yeah, and you'll see that sort of variance because mortgage rates are trying to look into the future. So they're saying, oh boy, Bank of Canada rates increasing, they've increased, but then they might say, okay, I think the worst is over. And so they might decrease temporarily, and then it goes up again.
We open page number 9.
Mhm.
And we will be looking for blue line downtown class B because we don't care about A and suburban. So it is blue line second from the top. You can see that Q1 2023, it's dropped to 7.5%, correct?
Yeah, so it's pretty steady along the way, and then the dark blue line for Class B goes from about 6.75% up to about 7.5%. So almost that's about 75 basis point increase. But the point is, Ms. Shable, that's national, right? That's not Winnipeg. So that includes Vancouver, Toronto, other cities whose capitalization rates are typically 200 basis points less than Winnipeg.
But it's still historical office capitalization rate prior to reference day 7.5%, correct?
Across the country. That's not Winnipeg. If you go next page, you'll see Winnipeg.
On page number 11, we look at office downtown B. In 2021, Colliers was 6%. In 2023, 6.25%. It's like you say, increase 2 plus 25 or 125. So this increase was happened between 2023 to 2021 to 2023. But we already saw that mortgage dropping and mortgage to government dropping, and also national historical office cap rate to 7.5.
Yeah, I wouldn't conclude that mortgage rates were dropping. What you saw is a very slight variances that happen. As I say, that's because the banks are usually looking ahead and trying to determine is the worst over or not. So you're going to have those variances. But the point is, it is irrefutable that rates in general went up, mortgage rates went up, borrowing costs go up, and cap rates went up. Irrefutable.
But now it started to drop down since April 1st, 2023. On same page 11, we can see historical Winnipeg cap rate. In historical Winnipeg cap rate for downtown, it's 7% only, correct? In Q1 2023 on your graphs.
Yeah, be careful. You have to take a look at the index. That's for Class A and AA. So it is showing that it's gone up 100 basis points, but that's the Class A that's at 7%.
Would you we going to page number 12? You would agree that from 6-year comparables, biggest leasable area closest to the subject property will be a comparable number 1 on Carlton.
Correct.
Because we have over 250,000 square feet. And it's only 7.48%.
Yeah, I wouldn't try and isolate one of a multitude of factors that influence capitalization rate and say that that's the reason that's the best comparison. I prefaced I had mentioned that this is a Class B, solid Class B, connected to the walkways, strong provincial covenant, low vacancy, good rents. It's a far superior property to the subject.
Your comparable number 3 on Main also big, around 120,000 square feet, 8.18%. My question, why you didn't choose between 2.5 and 8.2%? You want much higher.
Yeah, because again, this is a 1976 building on Main Street. The subject is 1906. Subject has heritage designation. So for those factors, it will have a higher capitalization rate.
On your presentation about rent, you mentioned that office C and D very close. Difficult to distinguish them, correct?
Sorry, it's the Class C and D is difficult to distinguish. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah, the market doesn't really have a category for Class D. That's more just the assessment department, which I think is a smart category because Class C is a wide spectrum. You can have the modernist mid-century buildings downtown, which are often called Class C, and at the other end, you can have heritage designated, turn of the century buildings. So I think it's a smart move to bifurcate that market category into C's and D's. But when we look at the market, typically they blend them all together. They just call it C.
And let's open page 19. Your Altus capitalization rent 2023 for office is 7.75%, correct? Why you didn't apply this for subject property?
Clear, when I say 2023, what we mean is the reference date. So that, or sorry, the assessment date. So that reference date last cycle was April 21, and now we moved to April 23 as the new reference date. And so what we're saying is it's irrefutable that cap rates have gone up during that period for office.
Okay, no further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Arnell, do you have any questions for Mr. Slaughter?
Just one. It's in regards to the shortfall rate. In your study, you got that the subject's properties, actual CAM and tax are 15.11 a square foot, and yet you apply 14. Where's the reasoning in there?
We often, and this is just an Altus decision, we often apply something slightly less, about 85% is typically the number I'm comfortable with, for shortfall versus the actual expenses, for the reason that shortfall is incurred on space that's vacant. So one would expect that there might be some expenses that might be less on a vacant space than if it's being occupied. Garbage, cleaning, whatever it may be. Not much. Typically, it's going to be pretty close, but we usually have that buffer.
Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Warren, do you have any questions for Mr. Slaughter?
Oh, they've all been answered, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. As have mine. So is there a need for a brief summary from either party?
Yes, please. Our job here today is to analyze the market evidence and determine the best conclusion of market value. My opinion of market supposed by least comparables. My opinion of market support by evidence provided and showed that we both apply income approach. The two main area for disagreement are rent and capitalization rate. In our case, rent for agent much higher than that assessment department. So our biggest disagreement is capitalization rate. Agent want assessment department capitalization rate 7.55%, agent capitalization rate 8.5%. That really undervalued the subject property. Also, in our case, we apply 3% not recoverable expenses, 14% vacancy, and $8 per square foot shortfall for occupancy vacant space. But we apply this for each similar property across the downtown. So to be consistent and fair. So based on evidence in my analysis, the April 1st, 2023 market value of subject property is $24,236,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Slaughter. Do you have a need for a brief summary?
Just very quickly, Madam Chair, thank you. I would suggest that the vacancy allowance and the capitalization rate are not very well supported in the city's evidence. In fact, I don't really see any evidence that supports those rates. We've tried our best to analyze and bring forward our interpretation of what's happening in the market with ample evidence and walk through each step very carefully of how.
All right, thank you very much. The next matter we will be hearing on today's docket is number 4, 180 Main Street. I believe Mr. Story is handling this matter.
This will still be myself, Madam Chair. I'll be representing this property and 379 Cumberland, and then Mr. Story will be representing the last two, 10 Donald.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just didn't know if we had to swear him in yet. Okay, not yet then. All right. Okay, so 180 Main Street. Ms. Schabel, please proceed when you are ready.
File number 24-1336, roll number 120-92966 000. We assess 2025 assessment with reference date April 1st, 2023 at 7,561,000. The subject property has classification 40 institutional and has taxation school exemption. The subject property office building, two-floor building, original built in 1949, with effective years built 1977. Land area of 27,207 square feet, land area 23,814 square feet, has basement of 7,322 square feet, gross floor area 49,244 square feet, with assessed leasable area 39,874. The subject property located in South neighborhood, South Portridge, 161. On page number 2, the subject property owner provide income expenses mailer and it has net and gross lease. Overall net lease at $13 per square foot and gross lease $18.30 per square foot. So if from gross lease we take out, for example, net lease, $18.30 minus $13 per square foot net lease, we showed that operating expenses in subject property leases $5.30. On page number 3, subject property air photo and street view, two-floor building located in downtown. More photo following on page 4 and 5. The subject property located on a corner Main in York Avenue. It has zoning M multiple use sector. This sector intends to encourage the range of uses, sites, activities in building typical to diverse and vibrant central business district. The built form is also diverse, ranging from high-rise towers at Portridge in Maine to more intimate scale building along Graham Avenue. Urban design review is intended to enhance pedestrian comfort and encourage high-quality built form. On page number 6, our income approach summary. We assess 39,874 square feet at $30.76. Give us potential rent $548,642. On page number 7, bottom page, I presented comparables similar to the subject property. For example, my comparables 155 4th Street, second floor building. On same neighborhood, 161 South Portridge. Building much older, 1928, built original. No, one floor, okay. Land started end of 2021. 4 points. Sorry, can I proceed? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Sorry. So rent started in the 2021 for 4.7 thousand square feet at $14 per square foot. Comparables 114 Gary Street, same neighborhood, building built in 1995, 3-floor building. Lease started in 2023 January, over 74,000 square feet at $80 per square foot. Comparable on 171 Donald, same neighborhood, building built 1964, 4-floor building. Lease in 2022, start by 1.2 thousand square feet at $22 per square foot. Comparables on 407 Graham Avenue, same neighborhood, built in 1947, like subject property, two-floor building, lease started in 2020 for 1.2 thousand square feet. It's $27.65. Comparable on 183 Kennedy Street. Same neighborhood, built 1985, two-floor building, lease in 2020 for 6.2 thousand square feet at $14.52. And my comparable, last comparable, 143 Smith Street, building built in 1907, start date 2021 for 4.2 thousand square feet at $15.81. Give us average $18.66 and media $16.91. We assess subject property at $13.76. We apply for this type of offices under fourth-floor buildings at 11% vacancy loss across all types of buildings, 3% not recoverable expenses. Usually net leases show that management fee completely recovered, that we apply only not recoverable expenses, 3%. Shortfall, $8 per square foot for occupation of a vacant space. Give us net operating income, $438,538. Model generate capitalization rate 5.8%. Give us estimate value of subject properties $7,561,000. On page number 8, capitalization rate. Our capitalization rate 5.8%. It's inside. It's for downtown office. On page 10, we provide income expense mailer provided to us. It's, you can see on page number 11, it's clean net rent. It is net rent at $13 per square foot. On page number 13, you can see a summary of charge by charge code. Net rent $13 per square foot, and total rent, it's if it's gross rent $18.38. Following page 14, let's look on my rent comparables. On page 14, 155 4th Street, it's one-floor building. Rent for $14 per square foot. On page 15, we have 114 Gary Street, three-floor building, rent for $18 per square foot, over 74,000 square feet.
Yes, Ms. Schabel, you've already gone through those rent comparables. Are they all the same ones on page 6? You've already given us
just
the...
we look on our my comparables photos.
Mhm.
On page 171, it's a four-floor building at 22. On page 17, 407 Graham Avenue, it's two-floor building at $27.65. On page 18, 183 Kennedy, two-floor building at $14.52. On page 19, 143 Smith, two-floor building and $50.81. So based on evidence presented in my brief, the April 1st, 2023 market value of subject property is $7,561,000. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Mr. Slaughter, do you have questions for the assessor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Schabel, again, did you have a chance to inspect the property?
Ms. Chair, also I have not inspected it, the subject property. I'm able to completely accurately describe it based on data we have on file.
Okay, thank you. On page 13 of your evidence, you have the rent roll. To be clear, this is the year-end 2023 rent roll. Is that correct?
Correct.
So you had mentioned the actual rent in the property is $13, but if we look at the rent roll closely, that's actually as of July 23, which would be post-reference year. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So the rent in the reference date was less than that amount?
His rent originally started in 2020. It will be same amount because it's not step up lease yet.
No, well, I'll address that in direct, but it was actually less. But I guess my question is, this is a lease that commenced in 2020, so it's fairly recent, and it's arm's length. There's nothing about this lease that is questionable, I guess, as far as being at market. So why would you not use the actual rent in place as the best indicator of market rather than the rents attained for other properties for something higher?
Because within our income approach, we take market evidence and we apply for similar property across the city to be consistent.
Okay. On page 8, you have your capitalization rate chart. And again, we don't have class C or D or anything. We have A and B, and then we have suburban. Your capitalization rate is 5.8%, but nothing even on the class A's is that low. So what is the evidence to support 5.8%?
In our chart, downtown offices between 5.9 to 7%. It's only 60% of the properties. His properties outside is 60%. It's inside 40%. So it's very close, 5.85%. Close to 20 percentile.
You agree that class A has a low of 6% and class B has a high of 8.5%. Would you not think that the subject property, a 1948 building with no parking, not connected to any walkways, rather isolated, would it not have a capitalization rate higher than those, not lower?
No, our statistical data showed it because it's model generate 5.85%.
Okay. That's all the questions. Thank you.
Statistical proof.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, Mr. Arnell, do you have any questions for the assessor? Your mic's off, sorry. Mr. Arnell, your mic is off.
Sorry about that. I know my question was asked. Thank you.
Oh, okay, sorry. Ms. Warren, do you have any questions for the assessor?
No, not at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, nor do I. So Mr. Slaughter, please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So again, we'll start on, we'll go right ahead to page 6 and 7. There's a photograph of the property, aerial map, and a brief description. And I think the pertinent points to bring out about the property are, I just alluded to them in the questioning, but it's a 1949 building. It's 2 stories. The basement is very small, just very rough storage. Typical interior finish, drywall, walls, carpet, few perimeter offices, T-bar ceiling. There's only 7 parking stalls on site. They're kind of under a cantilever portion of the second floor, and that's all. There's no other parking on site or even significantly or very closely nearby. And of course, it's rather isolated. It's not connected to any of the walkways or anything else. So this building had vacancy issues, and then in 2020, the college took occupancy. And the landlord, in order to bring in that tenant, spent about $1 million in tenant improvement allowance to fix up the space as the college would want, and another about $700,000 in landlord work. So they put in quite a bit of money to get this tenant. The rent negotiated in 2020, so rather recent, arm's length, was at $12 a square foot. Now, on the very last page of our brief, we have the rent roll, but the rent roll that we refer to as the year-end 22, because year-end 23, of course, is post-reference. And you'll see on that rent roll on the very last page that at the reference date, they were paying $12 a square foot. And then it stepped up after, but I didn't have that indication here that it was a step up. Usually it'll state that it steps up on the rent roll. I didn't have that. So I'll talk about that a bit more when we talk about market rent, but I just wanted to establish that. The rent was $12 a square foot, rather recently negotiated with a hefty landlord investment. So on page 11, we go through the steps that we take to determine what the appropriate market rent is in a fee simple analysis. And again, textbooks, appraisal textbooks, and board decisions have guided us that we not ignore the actual rents in place. We need to review them and then test them. So we've looked to, again, we've gone through this before, but the asking rents for what I consider a Class C building, 1949 vintage, and the asking rents hover between $12.75 and $14. The actual rents will be less. On page 14, we've gone through this before. The conclusion of the Class B segment of these comparisons is that it should hover somewhere between $12 to $14 a square foot net. So we had determined that the market rent, the actual rent in place of $12 a square foot was within the range of market. It is the best indicator. We wouldn't look to other buildings to refute that unless we felt that it was not at market. And we had applied $12 a square foot. My conclusion will change, and I'll describe that in my summary. So we start with $12 a square foot. Vacancy allowance, it is 100% occupied. But the market vacancy, which is what we also have to look to. So again, I described this in the previous property. We don't isolate ourselves to one or the other. But the market vacancy for this segment of property is going to be around 17% or higher. So it's not 11%, I think is what was applied by the city. That's not market. But at the same time, it's 100% occupied. So at the end of the day, we decided that 11% is fair because it is less than the actual market, but is higher than actual performance, and we accepted that. The shortfall rate, again, is very close to actual, so we've accepted that at $8 a square foot. Non-recovered expenses, we've accepted at 3%. Capitalization rate, though, and I won't go back to that report, Madam Chair. I tried to go through it as extensively as I could the first time, but you will recall our conclusions.
Yes.
The Class B is 7.25 to 7.75, and Class C is above that, 7.75 to just above 8%. It's not 5.8. There's nothing in evidence for any property downtown office that supports 5.8%. That's wrong. Even if it was 6.8%, I'd say it's wrong. The capitalization rate should be 7.75%. But I talked last property about looking at the whole. We don't just isolate ourselves into each rate and accept or not. We have to look at the value as a whole. I personally think an 11% vacancy allowance is very favorable because the property has a solid lease until 2029. So therefore, if I am accepting the market vacancy, the risk that I would attribute to that conclusion is less. And for that reason, and I want the panel to understand this, we are not applying what should be the cap rate of 7.75%. We are applying 7%, less than typical market. The reason is because we have a favorable vacancy allowance. I want the panel to understand that we're trying to look at value as a whole and not just focus on certain areas. How I come to that conclusion, Madam Chair, and I can tell you it was a bit of a deliberation. What I actually put in my evidence, because I was thinking we could probably justify a vacancy allowance of closer to 5 to 8% based on the site-specific performance, but also looking at the actual market at 17. So it'd probably be closer, to be fair, to about 8 to 10% would be our conclusion. But even if we went 5%, that comes to the same value with a 7.75% cap rate. So it's 6 of one, half dozen the other, and on top of that, it's very conservative. I probably could have pushed a little higher, but we're using 7%. So on page 18, we would have a conclusion that brings a value to $5,400,000. But, Madam Chair, the rent that was cited by the assessor at $13, at first I took issue with because that's post-reference. But to be fair, it actually was a step up. I went back and reviewed the files and found that that wasn't a renewal or something new at market, which I wouldn't admit as evidence, but it was a step up, which means if I was buying the property in April 23, I would be aware that the lease that I'm buying steps up very quickly. We don't look too far into step ups because then we're looking at something different than our methodology for cap rates. But if something steps up within the first 2-3 months or so, or if a vacancy is pending or anything else that is known to the investor, I don't think I can ignore that. And the $13 step up is, as I described in my market evidence, still within a range of acceptability. I take it with caution because it is a step up, number one, and number two, I understand how much the landlord had spent to attain that lease. But my conclusion is, I don't see a reason why I, as an objective appraiser, would veer away from that rent with the knowledge I have now after having completed my evidence. So, Madam Chair, what I'd like to do is increase my market rent to $13. Everything else stays the same, and the conclusion, the value, would be $5,892,000.
Okay.
And that is all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ms. Scheibel, do you have any questions for Mr. Slaughter?
Yes, please. Page 18. Did you mention that vacancy you apply 7% and your estimation 11?
No, I said if I was applying a typical capitalization rate, which I think is appropriate, I don't think I would apply that market vacancy. It's one or the other. I don't think I'm being a fair appraiser if I take the higher vacancy allowance and the higher capitalization rate. So before I presented the evidence, I had a deliberation. Do I lower my vacancy and keep the cap rate? Or that's, now that's more issues that we're different on. So I came to the conclusion, let's keep it simple. I'll accept the market vacancy, which isn't unreasonable because, again, the actual market vacancy isn't 11, it's 17. But I kept it at that and then recognized that my risk is decreased if I accept that higher vacancy allowance. And that is why I've decreased my capitalization rate from 7.75% to 7%. Which is
By the end of,
mathematical.
yes, but
Yeah.
vacancy by the end of day, it's 0%. And we still allowed 11% vacancy for future vacancy, correct? In 10, 15
Yeah,
years. How
that's
we
right.
estimate market income?
Yeah, you don't look to a point in time, but what we've been directed to do through appraisal texts and board decisions is if you have sustained vacancy above market, you cannot ignore that for this assessment cycle. Because even if you have a hypothesis that it should be cured, it's been 3 years of tough times, but it'll get better. Well, that gets recognized in the next cycle. So, but it cuts both ways is my point. And that is why I took a lot of care to make sure that I came with an appropriate conclusion with all the rates and allowances.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Arnell, do you have any questions for Mr. Slaughter?
Yes, just wondering regarding the vacancy rate. Like, would it not fall into your assessment of like certain buildings have special circumstances? So this building being fully rented, would that not fall out of the 17% vacancy market rate, even though you've gone to 11?
That's right, Mr. Arnell. So we don't look at one thing in isolation. Like Ms. Scheibel said, we don't look point in time because we're trying to estimate over the life of the building. So a vacancy allowance will never be zero. But we don't ignore when a sustained vacancy for 3 or 5 years is higher than market either. So as an appraiser, I have to look at all these facts. Number one, we have a tenant in place. Great. We'll never apply 0% vacancy because that tenant could leave in 6 years when their lease terminates. We have a market vacancy for these type of properties that's 17%. But we won't apply that because we have a sustained tenant in place. Or if we did apply that, we would apply a lower capitalization rate. So I hope I'm not confusing the matter. What I'm trying to do is make sure the panel understands I'm looking at the value in whole and trying to navigate each of the rates to come up with the right conclusion. As a rule of thumb, I can share this with you. As an appraiser, what I do when I look at vacancy allowance, I look at 3-year stabilized historical, I look at market, and I also determine where do I think everything's heading after this? What's the best information I have without being hypothetical? And my conclusion almost always falls in between the two, between 3-year stabilized and market.
Okay, but this property has a 14-year lease, correct?
It has 9 years left on the lease at this point. Yeah, it goes till 2029. Sorry, they have an option to terminate in 2029.
Okay, doesn't say that in here, but okay.
Yeah.
So wouldn't the length of the lease affect that vacancy rate?
Right, and exactly. That's why I had to deliberate before this. Do I accept the vacancy allowance, which is higher, but then I will decrease my capitalization rate to come to the same conclusion on value as I would have had if I used a low vacancy allowance with a market capitalization rate. It's the same, it's the same thing. If I'm recognizing the
The
risk,
same thing to get to the bottom number, yes.
yes, exactly.
Yeah, okay, so,
Yeah.
okay, that's
So
all I had.
It's a great question though, Mr. Ronell, because I really was going to come in with a 5 or I can't remember what it was, 6 or 7% vacancy to recognize owner occupant or a single occupant with a market capitalization rate. But I decided to go this way, which is 6 of one, half dozen the other, the value.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Warren, do you have any questions?
Yeah, just you've changed the rent to $13. You've kept everything else, and your cap rate 7%. Your total is 5892 that you've changed it to. So your NOI would be different also, wouldn't it?
No, that's correct. All of the rates along the way would have changed with the $13 rent. I just jumped right to the conclusion. I can give you each of the rates if you'd like. I have that.
Well, mostly it's just because we're keeping the 7% cap rate, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you can give me the new, I'm not quite sure if I need a different number for anything else, but the new NOI.
Certainly. It would be 412,413.
413. Okay, because the shortfall you kept, the shortfall rate, the total, everything else is the same except for the rent.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you very much. Those are my only questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And my questions were actually answered there. So I'm good. So we can move on to the, oh, sorry. I forgot. Is there a need for a brief summary from either party? Getting ahead of myself.
Our job here today to analyze the market evidence to determine the best conclusion of market value. Our assessment based on rent, just over subject rent, $13.76, 11% vacancy, 3% not recoverable expenses, and capitalization rate 5.8 give us evidence that market value of subject property on April 1st, 2023 is $7,561,000. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Slaughter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hope I didn't confuse matters by my explanation of how I navigated the vacancy allowance and the cap rate. But the main point here is that 5.8% as a capitalization rate is it's not at all supported by anything in evidence. It's contrary to all the evidence. The capitalization rate has to be increased. And I think the overall value that we presented is fair. So thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, we can move on to the next matter on the docket this afternoon then. So that is number 10 Donald Street.
That'll be Mr. Story.
Yes. Sorry? Yes. Okay, thank you. Can you please swear in Mr. Story, please?
I will just admit Mr. Story, Madam Chair. He's
Thank
joining
you.
right now. Mr. Applicant, would you please state your full name?
My name is Jared Story.
Thank you. Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Madam Chair, would you please ask Mr. Story to turn up his volume?
Oh, yes, please, Mr. Story, can you turn up your volume?
Or maybe move closer to the microphone? I'm having a hard time hearing him.
Oh, can you hear me now?
That's clear. Ms. Harlan?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
All right. So, Ms. Scheibel, please proceed.
File number 24-3279, roll number 120-92544-000. We assess 2025 assessment years with reference day April 1st, 2023 at $1,653,000. The subject property, two-floor office building, original built in 1961. Occupied land area 30,036 square feet. And plan area 3,073 square feet. Zero basement and gross floor area 5,559 square feet and leasable 7,353 square feet. The subject property located neighborhood Broadway, Assiniboine, 165. On page 2nd, I show the subject lease at $14.35. It shows that property tax, annual administration in utilities, 100% paid by tenants. It's clean net rent at $14.35. On page number 3, more air photo and following the street view of subject property. It's located in downtown. Irregular shape of plant. On page number 4, more street view. Two-floor building. It's on page number 5. It's located zoning D, downtown living sector. Intent to enhance to primary residential area. Use of building if extended to be primary residential. The built form range from 2-story century home to low-rise walk-up apartment to high-rise condominium. For urban design review is tend to enhance the pedestrian environment. On page number 6, summary of our income approach. We assess 7,353 square feet at $14.30. Give us potential rent $105,148. Like already mentioned, subject property at $14.35. On page number 6, I have set comparables like for previous property on Fort Gary Donald Graham Kennedy Smith. Give us average $18.66. So I will don't go deeper. For this property, we apply its office building under 4-story. Like previous, 11% vacancy loss to be consistent across this type of property across the city, 3% not recoverable expenses, in shortfall $8 per square foot on vacant space. Give us net operating income 84,304. Capitalization rate selected by model 5.1%, give us estimate value of 1,653,000. On page 10, 11, income expense mailer provided to us, 212, and also my comparables. I already mentioned them. Previous case. Based on evidence in analysis, the April 1st, 2023 market value of subject property is 1,653,000. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Story, do you have any questions for the assessor?
I have a few. Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Scheibel, have you had the opportunity to inspect this property?
Mrs. Chair, although I have not inspected it, the subject property, I am able to completely accurately describe it based on data we have on file.
Okay, sorry, so you've not, so no, you've not visited? Is that correct, Ms. Scheibel?
Correct.
Okay. Now you'd mentioned the lease, but that was an owner-occupied submission. Are you aware of that?
If you look on page number 2, it's net lease.
Right, but you would be aware in your research on this property that the tenant, Fast Trip here, that was an owner-occupier for some time, and you can see that the managing partner. I'm sorry, excuse me. No, let me just finish, please. Mr. Fast, as the managing partner of Fast Trip here, signed off on this, so that would indicate to you that that's an owner-occupied internal rent, correct?
If you look on page number 1,
Yeah.
Owner 10 Donald Street Limited. And this property occupied by Fast Tripler Law. So it's lease in place $14.35 per square foot.
No, you would have seen in the review of the income and expense statements that is not the case. That in fact, Fast Trip here was the owner and the occupier. Is that? And it's fine if you didn't see that, but you can't confirm that, or that didn't come across in your research. You didn't notice that.
It's fill in by. It's still owner 10 Donald Street.
Okay. Okay.
Mr. Scully, perhaps it's something you'll address in your evidence.
Sure,
on.
absolutely. Yeah, we'll move on very quickly. Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, and now, Ms. Scheibel, these rants, and forgive me, I heard most of Mr. Slaughter's presentation, but I'm not sure if we've gone through these, but just very quickly, can we agree, Ms. Scheibel, that 155 Fort, Unit 200, that is indeed a semi-gross lease? Are you aware of that?
In my analysis, it's all net leases. Because when I analyze, I have recovery for tax, utilities, administration.
No, it quite clearly says on that submission that tax, insurance, management, waste and snow, and R&M is included. So that would make that lease semi-gross. Can we agree on that?
If you open page 12,
yep.
It's clearly showed that lease for 7,440 square feet for $8,900 monthly, and all utilities 100% paid by tenants. It's clean.
No, Ms. Scheibel, we're discussing 155 Fort. That's our client. I'm talking about your rent comparables, unit 200 at 155 Fort. According to the INE, again, that's our client, so we have all of the data. That is a semi-gross lease, and it's indicated on the income and expense mailer. Are you aware of that?
I hope you will be provide evidence in your rebuttal to support your statement.
Well,
my analysis showed $14 per square foot net.
Sure. Well, I'm certainly providing it verbally, and Madam Chair, if you'd like, I can send you the INE and you can confirm it. But
and I analyze INE as well. Each my comparables, I check each INE.
Okay, well, we can certainly submit that as rebuttal. Gary, of course, can you agree that it is much, much larger than our subject? It's a single
Correct.
government lease. Okay.
Yes, it's over $18 per square foot. We assess around 40.
Right. Okay. And then lastly, 143 Smith. Is that a semi-gross? That's a nonprofit, correct?
It's showed $15.81 net lease.
Okay.
So
right.
Provided to us.
Okay. And but all this this work up on page 6, this is all model derived. Is that correct?
Correct. And it's a model drive $14.30, just 5 cents less than existing lease.
Right, but it's not an existing lease. I think we've established that it's
existing lease, 100% utility recovery.
Yep.
We have 2 different company names.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to move on from that issue. Okay, you can address it when you get to your evidence.
No, that's fine. And that cap rate of 5
time.
Yes, absolutely. And that cap rate of 5.1. Is there anything to support a cap rate of 5.1% for a downtown office as of the reference date? Do you see anything that would support that?
Market evidence showed that property 1.5 million to 2 million. More customers can afford to buy. They bring capitalization rate much lower to 5.1%.
I've certainly heard that.
More people.
Sorry, I've heard that hypothesis before, but do you have anything in evidence to support that a wider pool of bidders would create a bidding frenzy for these small downtown offices, or is that simply a hypothesis that the city is forwarding for this site?
Model generate 5.1% on data in our records.
Okay, but
It's
nothing in evidence to support
statistical.
that, correct?
It's statistical proved by our data,
Okay,
by wholesale across the city.
okay, and none of that statistical data that you've mentioned here is available for our review or for the panel's review. Is that a fair comment?
Correct.
Okay. And I'm
But
speaking of,
I would like to point that all information provided by owner is by law, how our model set up for real records provided to us, for real sales across the city.
okay. All right. And does the city consider this then in its model? Does it consider it a downtown office C class building?
It's considered that it's a property two-floor building, original built 1961. Let's say it's 8,000 square feet.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to determine. I'm looking at your chart. So the cap rate evidence that you've supplied is on page 8 of your brief, and I'm trying to determine which cohort you would assign this to. So is it a downtown C?
We have downtown A and B presented for our view to be considered for outside sources, Collier, Siberia, and Cushman. It's between 5.9 and 7% for the city, only 60% of property. This property 5.1, because it's small, it's before 20 percentile. But it's statistical crunch numbers for this model.
Okay. Okay, but presumably, can we agree that a downtown C property would carry a higher risk profile than a downtown B? C would be inferior to B. Is that, we agree on that at a minimum?
We have this information in our system, but not on this table on page number 8.
Okay. I guess what I'm driving at, Ms. Scheibel, is if you're suggesting that the Bs in the downtown are 7 across the board, and based on what you've submitted here, the brokers are suggesting that the Bs run from 6.25 to 8.5. Would it not stand to reason that the Cs would generally be applied a higher capitalization rate than the Bs?
Like I already mentioned, this property is around 1.5 million. It's more purchasers can buy this property that bring capitalization rate lower. It's data, market evidence.
Okay, and okay, I'll move on from that, but just so we're clear, there's nothing to support that 5.1. I think that's what I'm hearing. Is that fair?
I already answered my question.
Okay, I think I will leave that there, Madam Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Arnell, do you have any questions for the assessor?
No questions, thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Warren, do you have any questions for the assessor?
None, thank you.
Nor do I. Can Mr. Story please proceed with your presentation?
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so this is 10 Donald Street. You may know this building as you cross the Donald Street Bridge. There is a little footbridge providing access to the door. That's how we typically know it, but that is the property in subject today. It was indeed owner occupied by Fast Trip here. It had been a law office in its previous iterations. It's now been repositioned on the market, and they are looking for tenants. So again, I was able to visit in May of 2024. The current vacancy there's about just shy of 2,300 square feet that's been actively marketed for some time now without any, well, it's still available. So it was owner occupied. It's now being repositioned, and it's unique in that any tenant in that property would require or would be required to share the kitchenette facilities and some other common areas. So it's quite small. So that is the reality. It's a 2-floor building. Now it does have something of a locational issue, I'll suggest to you. It is at that at Assiniboine, just at where the Donald Street Bridge overpasses, and they have a not unsubstantial amount of nuisance behavior that we observed and was noticed and certainly remarked on at the visit. So as you can imagine, access from that footbridge is not a positive. Proximity to the underside of the Donald Street Bridge is not a positive. And the parking lot, which is a positive, faces directly onto a back lane between Assiniboine and Hargrave. So we do have some locational issues here that we should consider. Ultimately, we're suggesting that the rent that's been applied is too high, and the cap rate is just irrefutably far too low. Mr. Slaughter has gone through the Altus cap study for office properties. I'm sure you've gone through it in great detail, so I'll leave that there. But ultimately, for the purpose of our exercise today, we are considering this Class C or D, and we've applied a cap rate initially of 8%, although I am going to make a slight adjustment. In terms of the rents, that $14 rent is that's a book rent. That's an internal rent. That is not a true market rent. That was we've had some back and forth here, but that is not a real rent. So I've included the C and D table on page 17. Class C office. It appears that the asking range is $10 to $14 per foot. Averaged, of course, at $12, and Class D ranges from 5 to 12, averaged at 10 roughly. So we've applied $12 per foot. I think that adequately captures some of the site-specific issues regarding the shared common area and that sort of thing. And we've also captured that locational issue. So I am going to adjust my cap rate based on the fact that we're applying that rent that is at $12. We'll get to that in a moment, but we've also included some cap rate or some rental comps on page 18. Rory Street, that's 65 Rory. So we have a fresh lease there at 7,400 feet. That's at $13. That's in the East Exchange. That is superior. It's a main floor rent. March of 23, it starts right before our reference date at $13. That's a good indicator. Though if all things were equal, prospective tenants would likely be, I think they would probably find the East Exchange more desirable than this property that faces onto the back lane and of course has that negative influence by way of proximity to the Donald Street Bridge. We also have two finance offices on Rory. That's in the same building. That property has an effective age of 1988. Again, I would consider it superior, and those rents are $12 and $13. So that more than supports our request for $12 per foot. Vacancy in this property is currently at 36%. That is based on approximately 2,200 feet being vacant. However, we have captured the inherent risk in the subject in the cap rate. So we are accepting that market vacancy of 11%, which I believe to be frankly too low. But on balance, it does make sense when we apply that higher cap rate and we look to those rents that are at $12. So ultimately, Madam Chair, we've submitted an NOI of $69,703. I think that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Our cap rate was 8%. I'm going to make an adjustment. I think I've over adjusted for location. I think that factor is likely already captured. So I will adjust that to 7.75, bringing us to 899,000 rounded. So our request today, once again, will be $899,000, and that is based on an NOI of 69,703 and an adjusted cap rate of 7.75, which puts us exactly where we ought to be for these Class C and D buildings in the downtown. I've included some photos. Again, this is from my inspection in May of 2024. You can see the vacant area. No adjustment required for condition. It's in fine shape. And then I've also included my lease comparisons. I should point out that Broadway is our best comp. That is a law office. So you can imagine proximity to the law courts down Broadway is desirable for law firms typically. And this property was owner occupied by Fast Trip here. So they are indeed a law firm. So that comp on Broadway is at 1234. So and it is smaller. So once again, that $12 is firmly supported by market data, by real evidence. And now I won't go through the cap rate study once again. I think it's been gone through by Mr. Slaughter in excellent detail. But in terms of our conclusions, as you've heard, what we're considering downtown C ought to run between 7.75 and 8.25. I'd initially come in with 8. I feel very, very well supported at 7.75, leading to an indicated market value for this property of $899,000. And I think the ask looks large, but I believe that is because that modeled cap rate of 5.1 is simply is very, very far off from the reality of the downtown market. So I think I'll leave it there, Madam Chair, and very happy to take your questions, and a thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Scheiwel, do you have any questions for Mr. Story?
Thank you. You didn't provide any brochure show that a lease available in this place, correct?
I'm sorry, say that again.
You didn't provide any lease brochure or something that is active leasing space?
No, so
that we cannot verify it?
Sure, that would be considered post-reference at this stage, but you're certainly welcome to Google it. It will come up in your research of this property.
Would you agree that at moment of assessment, April 1st, 2023, building full 100% occupied, is there a vacancy?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. I would say that we'd have to look at when Fast Trippier was winding down their operations, and when the building was being repositioned, it likely would have been more than 36% vacant at that stage, actually.
Would you agree that lease, original lease will be in 2023? It showed 100% occupied?
No, it's not a real lease. That was the owner occupying his own space. So that's a book rent. That would not be considered any evidence of market rent.
No further questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Arnell, do you have any questions for Mr. Story?
Just one on his comparables on page 18. Yep. Like that first one is a month-to-month lease, so at $8.12. Is this a fair comparable?
No, and actually, you know what? I thank you for pointing that out. I actually struck that one out. I'm not putting any weight on it. So yes, please disregard that. It's a great point. However, the 2 through 6 are solid comparables. So I haven't put a lot of weight on that one. You're quite right. It shouldn't be included. But it does give you something of a picture of the downtown rental market. But I think you're quite right, and I would put a lot more weight on that $11.50 to $13, which is still going to average around $12.
So
I would throw that one out.
It would be above 12 then.
I haven't done the math, but it's that's yes, it should be above 12. Yeah, I think you're right.
Okay, that's the only question I had. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Warren, do you have any questions for Mr. Story?
They were answered. Thank you.
Thank you. As were mine. Is there a need for a brief summary on this matter?
Yes, please. Our job here today is to analyze the market evidence that determines the best conclusion of market value. We apply income approach, and we have two main areas of disagreement are rent and the capitalization rate. The subject property existing lease $14.35 and model generate $14.30. It's fair. Agent didn't provide any evidence to support his statement about owner occupied. On moment of assessment, April 2023, it's 0 vacancy. Lease expired end of 2023. No any evidence support existing searching for new tenants. So subject property at moment of assessment, 0% vacancy, and we still apply 11% vacancy for future vacant. In 10 years, this place can be vacant. That's why we give this 11%. For subject property, this type, we apply 3% not recoverable expenses, $8 per square foot for vacant space. And our capitalization rate 5.1%, due market evidence showed that a small property between 1.5 million to 2 million has more people afford to buy it, that bring capitalization rate much lower. Based on my evidence analysis, April 1st, 2023, market value of subject property is 1,653,000. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Story.
Yes,
Would you like
thank-
to make a brief summary?
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. And Ms. Scheibel, you're quite right. We are here to look at the best indicators of market data. And from what I can tell, Madam Chair, we haven't seen any data from the city regarding how the cap rate was derived. And there appears to be some confusion as to whether or not this property is or was owner occupied. The city would be well aware that it had been owner occupied for many years based on the previous income and expense submission, so that would be misleading to suggest otherwise. Further to that, at the reference date, the property was not 100% occupied. It was likely vacant to a tune that was greater than 36%. So that's also misleading. We want to be very careful that we're providing accurate information. Our main issue here, of course, is that cap rate. We see nothing in the market that would suggest a 5.1 capitalization rate is durable or realistic. Bless you, Mr. Arnold. So ultimately, we've provided you with our full cap rate study. We've laid bare all of our assumptions. We've showed you how we've come to our conclusions. They're supported by the market. They're supported by the brokers, and we've received nothing from the city in support of their cap rate. So I would ask the board to give weighted consideration to the market data that Altus has provided you, and I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We can move on to the next matter on the docket, which is number 7 on this afternoon's docket, 360 Broadway. Ms. Scheibel, please proceed.
File number 24-2375, roll number 120-925-18000. Assessment years 2025 with reference date April 1st, 2023. We assess subject property at 6,857,000. The subject property office building, 6-floor building, original built in 1962 with addition at 1982. Give effective years built 1982. The subject property located on land area 16,964 square feet with plan area 8,601 square feet. Has basement of 6,716 square feet, gross floor area over 47,000 square feet, and leasable area assessed area 39,363 square feet. The subject property located neighborhood Broadway, Assiniboine, 165. On page number 2, I presented existing leases at the property. We have net leases between, you can see First National Bank of Canada, occupied net lease $31.30. Subway restaurant at $20.75, it's net lease. Southeast Child on 400 units, net lease at $20.56. And net lease on Southeast Resource at $33. We have also gross rent for Robert Whitehall at $32. Havana Consulting Service gross lit in $79.55. Shavava Investment Corporation and $74.60. Total occupied. A total area of 41,209 square feet and occupied 34,989 square feet. On page number 3, air photo and the street view subject property following. It's located in downtown, rectangle shape of land. 6-floor building located zoning M, multi-use sector Intend to encourage the range of uses, size, activities, and building typical to diverse, a vibrant central business district. The built form is also diverse, ranging from high-rise tower at Portage and May to more intimate scale building along Graham Avenue. Urban design review intend to enhance pedestrian comfort, encourage high-quality built form. On page number 6, in rent comparables to support rent, assessed rent. I have comparables on 287 Broadway, rent for $18.21. Lease on 2094 Portage Avenue for $20 per square foot. 305 Broadway, lease for over 4.2 thousand square feet at $13 per square foot. 2 leases on 137 Market Avenue at $13 and $13.50. 2 leases on Bannatyne between 140 Bannatyne, $13.50 and $13 per square foot. And lease on Rory, 65 Rory Street, units 100 at $13 per square foot for 7,411 square feet. Give us average $14.53 and media $13. I also presented park rent comparables on 117 Gary Street. So stabilized net operating income per stall per month, $107.77. 252 4th Street at $137.95. 168 Edmonton Street, 25 stalls at $82.75. 160 Donald Street, 80 stall at $318.95. 325 York Avenue, 57 stalls at $210.22. 155 Gary Street, 65 stalls, $93.23. And my 7 comparable intersection Broadway Donald at $75.43.
Excuse me.
Give us media of $146.61 and media $107.77. Let's go into my summary income approach on page number 7. We assess 39,361 square feet at $14.91. Give us potential rent of $586,741. For office C class, we apply across the city 13% vacancy loss, 3% not recoverable expenses, a shortfall for occupation empty space, $10 per square foot. Give us net operating income for $143,980. For subject property model generates 6.95%. Give us estimation of $6,388,000. It's for office space. On page number 8, a parking lot. We did assess 22 stalls at $18 per month per units. And capitalization rate for parking lot 4.5. This give estimate value of parking lot $469,000. On page 9, a summary of 2 stream. Potential rent for whole property 607,861 square feet. The overall capitalization rate 6.78% give us estimate market value of $6,857,000. On page number 10, we have capitalization rate table. So downtown property between for 2080 percentile 5.9 to 7%. For if you look on my fourth paragraph for capitalization rate. For the 2025 general assessment, April 1st, 2023 reference date, capitalization rates were derived from model-generated estimates of net operating income in sale price that were time-adjusted April 1st, 2023. The assessed values produced by the application of those model-generate capitalization rate were compared to the sale price. The assessment to sale price ratios were calculated. The resulting ratio statistic for the assessment taxation department's income producing models satisfy the standards specified in set forth in the Standard of Ratio Studies approved in April 2013, published by International Association of Assessing Officers. Our capitalization rate are further supported by comparison with real estate market report for Colliers International Canada, CBRE National Research, and Cushman Wakefield. The following chart comparables assessment capitalization rate with published rates by fitting assessment taxation department rate in the property type characterized used in those report. Assessment taxation property type classes are more comprehensive, so they covered every property type in the city. The 20 and 80 percentiles show the range of capitalization rates used by assessment taxation department for 60% of the parcels within the specific property type. In many cases, the published rate fall with 20 and 80 percentile indicates the tenability of capitalization rate derived by assessment taxation department. For subject property, we apply 6.95%. It's inside our downtown properties, 16%, 5.9, and 7%. On following pages 12, I have air photo and street view of my comparables. On page 12, 285 Broadway, rent for $18.21. On page 13, 294 Portridge, rent for $20 per square foot. On page 14, 305 Broadway, rent for $13. On page 15, 3136 Market, rent for $12.50 and $13 per square foot. On page 16, I have comparables 140 Bannatyne units 20, rent for $13.50. Units 202, $13, and 65 Rory Street, 100 for $13. On page number 17, income expenses provided to us. That all these expenses, it's a law to provide to run our model, our statistical data. Through page 22. On page 23, it's 2025 property as not be sent to the owner. So based on my evidence, the analysis, April 1st, 2023, market value of subject property is $6,857,000. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Story, do you have any questions for the assessor?
I have a few, yes, thank you. Ms. Scheibel, I'm just looking at your page 1. You're showing the effective year is 1982 with the actual years built of 62 to 82. Can you tell me which part of this building was built in 1982?
It was additional build. If you look on page 3, on left bottom corner, we can see by roof. It's two distinguished buildings together.
I'm sorry, you're suggesting that there's an addition built in 1982?
Correct.
Okay. Can Okay, we'll get to that in my main. I don't believe that's correct. Okay, so that age of 1982, that's an arbitrary distinction, presumably. That's an assessor has made that that adjustment to the entire building, that its effective age ought to be
Yeah,
1982.
in our opinion, effective years built 1982.
Okay, and have you visited the property?
Although I have not inspected it, the property, I'm able to completely accurately describe it based on the data we have on file.
Okay. All right, going to page 2, can we agree? Well, okay, so I think you said the First National Bank of Canada, but that's the First Nations Bank of Canada. So can we be clear about that? Is that correct?
First National Bank of Canada tenants in the basement, first floor and fifth floor.
Okay, it quite clearly says it's the First Nations Bank of Canada. So I just want to be very clear.
First Nation Bank of Canada. Yeah.
Yep,
On my
and
page
that's-
2, I just try to analyze income expense mail provided to us.
Okay, and they're showing you 15% vacancy at that point?
Vacancy from 41,000 square feet, only 6,000.
That's 15% mathematically, correct?
Possible, I didn't estimate. We apply 13% per square foot to be consistent with this type of building. It be fair across the city.
Okay, and many of the rents in this building are either gross, semi-gross, or owner related, or owner or non-arm's length. Can we agree on that?
That's why I showed net lease and gross leases. It's over $20, close to $30 per square foot, and we assess less than $15 per square foot. It's fair and very well supported by my evidence.
No, it's not my question. I'm asking if you're aware that a majority of this property, these leases, are gross and semi-gross. And the reason that I mentioned this, Michelle, is
yes, if you
you've
look
erroneously,
on page number 2.
yeah, I'm looking
Ms.
at
Scheibel,
page
let
2.
him finish, please.
Yes,
He had a
and
question.
I'm just asking if you're aware, because it appears that you've erroneously put some of these rents into the net rent category when they are in fact gross, semi-gross, or related to the ownership of the property. Are you aware of that?
Yes, if you open on
Okay.
page number 18, it's gross and net lease together.
Right. And that owner, or sorry, that income and expense mailer, that's post-reference, correct? The one that you submitted?
It's ended August 2023. I see. On page 18, we can see that they have parking stalls, 64 parking stalls
Sorry,
reported to us.
yeah,
Wait,
no,
that
we're not-
wasn't the question, Ms.
not that one.
Scheibel. It was,
Yeah.
No,
it
I just see
was
mistake in
regarding
our
the,
assessment, because we assess
Ms.
only
Scheibel,
20.
Ms. Scheibel, I'm speaking for a minute, please.
Okay.
Ms. Scheibel, I'm speaking, okay? Please answer the question. Mr. Story, please repeat your question.
Yeah, I'm just, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just trying to establish that the income and expense mailer that has been submitted is indeed post-reference. Can we agree, Ms. Scheibel? Okay, I can ask my
Ms.
next question.
Scheibel, you were asked a question.
Yes, it's post-reference. It's information August 2023.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so next, looking at the rental indicators. Okay, can we agree that those first two appear to be outliers? Is that a fair comment? This is on your page 6.
On my page 6, two property on Broadway in Portridge rent for $20 and $18 per square foot.
Right, and okay, so, okay.
And we assess less than $15 per square foot. It's
right.
fair.
And no, it's not fair. So 294 Portage, that's a gross or semi-gross lease. Are you aware of that? That's the Somerset building.
It's
a
a net
nonprofit.
lease.
I believe they just had the hearing, and that would be known to the city that that is indeed a gross or semi-gross lease. 305 Broadway, is that, would you consider that your best comparable?
It's only 4,000 square feet and $13 per square foot. It's good comparables.
Okay, and are you aware that the owner spent about $625,000 to get that tenant? Are you aware of that? Your research?
Yeah, the owner should put a renovation to securities rent of $13 per square foot. It's part
Right.
capital investment.
Right, and no such work has been done to our subject in terms of permits that you could find. Is that fair?
Effective years built 1982. How it's occupied.
Okay.
It's a good space.
Okay, I'm just going to go quickly to page 7. This is all modeled, correct, Ms. Scheibel?
Correct.
Okay. Did you calculate the shortfall in this building?
Our shortfall 4,000. It's
Did you
model generate. I didn't
You
calculate.
did not. Okay, good. Moving on. In terms of the parking lot, can we agree that this parking lot is, well, in terms of the way that it's situated around the building, it would not be considered separately developable? Is that fair?
It's a parking lot in downtown and has special assessment. If we don't have parking lot separate income, it will be part of rent in our model. And I came across
Scheibel,
that we
I'm asking
assess
you if you can.
assess about
can-
parking lot. We assessed
asking-
22 square parking stall and clearly reported 64. It should be upward adjustment for our assessment. I will be looking into after hearing.
Sorry, my question once again is, could this parking lot be separately developed? I'm asking for a reason. I want to get to that cap rate, but I want the board to be aware that it's not simply a standalone parking lot, or rather it rings the building, correct? So
Perhaps
it's not,
we should just
Parking
address that in
parking
your-
lot generate income. We can assess parking lot separate or part of rent
Okay.
inside building.
okay.
In
So if this
this case,
property-
because it's downtown, parking lot rare and very expensive, we create separate income stream. And also I already mentioned, subject property has 64 parking lot. And
No, it
we
doesn't.
assess only
No,
22.
Ms. Scheibel, it doesn't have 64 stalls. It benefits from the consolidation with 84 Carlton, which is next door, which is separately assessed and separately taxed. There are 22 stalls on its site.
I
In
will be
terms,
looking into.
sure. In terms of the cap rate, do you have anything to support that 4.5%?
It's parking lot at a piece of land. It's no
Okay, we're not talking about the parking lot anymore, okay? We're moving
parking
on.
lot
Just-
4.5% across whole downtown.
Okay, and with no
We have
evidence,
to
correct?
assess
Right,
because
I understand.
it's no capital investment. It's just piece of land. We have to assess somehow.
Okay, so, okay, I think you've answered
So
my
for
question.
all parkings, 4.5% capitalization rate.
And to be clear, there's no evidence to support that figure, correct?
We have, but I didn't present it here. It's
Okay.
statistical data,
Okay,
how to assess.
okay. And and then I guess my question on the cap rate on the main holding, if you're suggesting that all of the office Bs ought to be 7, and the brokers are saying 7 to 8.5, then why is this C class building, why is it falling below the superior B class in terms of the
Because
capitalization rate? divided by the number?
our statistical data shows that for this specific property site, 6.95%.
Okay, if that were the case, then wouldn't that statistical data end up in this chart or somehow be viewable for the panel or the ratepayer?
It's statistical data, and I already say it's between 60% of property in downtown, between 5.9 and 7%.
Okay.
It's
right, and this-
inside is 60% of a property.
Okay. And just finally, you've presented no sales to support your conclusions.
All sales, it's analyzed by our data, it's statistical data. Like I already mentioned, all sales across the city we analyze.
Okay,
That
so
give us model
no
generated
sales to view in evidence. Thank you very much, Ms.
capitalization
Scheibel.
rate.
Those are my questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arnell. Do you have any questions for the assessor?
No questions, thanks.
Ms. Warren, do you have any questions for the assessor?
None, thank you.
I have no questions either at this point. So, Mr. Story, please proceed. Just give me 1 second. I just need to turn on a light, please, because it's getting dark very quick. Sorry about that. Okay. Okay. Go ahead.
Good to go? Okay, perfect. Okay, so we've established that we are indeed in the 300 block of Broadway, 360 Broadway. The property is a 6-story masonry office building. It is indeed a Class C. It's not connected to the walkway system. It has 22 stalls that ring around the building that would not be considered separately developable. It's required for the to obtain the the tenancy. They also use the parking at 84 Carlton. That's indicated on the income and expenses. The property was built in 1962. I'm not sure why the assessor is suggesting that it was partially built in 1982. It was indeed built in 1962. It has 40,536 gross upper square feet, and then 6,716 square feet in the basement. So ultimately, the leasable area, we've suggested here 39,228. We're going right off the rent roll, so we're using 39,911 for this assignment. I believe that is slightly higher than what the assessor's using, but we're going from the rent roll, so we think that's appropriate. There are 2 staircases. There's a central elevator. There is a First Nations bank on the main floor and a Subway restaurant. So ultimately, we have, again, the 22 stalls, and then we use 84 Carlton as well. I have some photos. You can see them. On page 7, directly to the south of the subject, this is on the bottom picture. You can see that there's a vacant parking lot, or vacant lot that's used as parking. That is 84 Carlton, and that is separately taxed and separately assessed. All of the rents in this property are either gross or semi-gross. And then many of the tenants are non-arm's length to the ownership. The ownership actually occupies some of the space as well. It's called the Shawano Wapanong building, and you can see Shawano Investments and other related corporations occupy that building. So I believe Mr. Slaughter went over the Class C and D recent market rents. So these have all been vetted by our office. We've gone through these in great detail, and I will suggest to you, for the sake of brevity here, Madam Chair, the first 5 on Broadway are great comps right across the street. They're in the 300 block of Broadway. The first 2 clearly are outliers. I would not put any weight on those. But if you look at the bottom 3, let's say $10.50, $11.50, and $12.34, despite one of the units being quite small, we get to an average rent of $11.45. Market Avenue, now that's the Marshall Wells building, so I would suggest that is superior. It's a heritage building in the East Exchange, would likely be more desirable from a market perspective, and that's reflected in the rents. Those rents average to $12.56. 65 Rory is it's the Northern Electric building. The assessor has used those rents as well. Now it does have 2 addresses, so I believe that she used 140 Bannatyne. 140 Bannatyne is the same building, and those are reasonably good rents. However, they're good rents, but we have to consider that we're not in the East Exchange, we're in the 300 block of Broadway. So slightly different. So with those 3 sets of indices, we are averaging anywhere between $11.45 to $12.80. You would, of course, have to make some adjustment for location. Of course, the East Exchange is, from my perspective anyway, superior, and the rents are indeed higher. So when we look to Broadway, we're using a rent of $12 overall blended, as we calculate on page 12 for you. Now there are two outliers there. The subway lease is $19.25 and it's semi-gross. So we've used $18. The First Nations Bank of Canada appears to be below market. That may be related to the ownership. So we've used what we'll call a typical bank rent of $25. Ultimately, over 39,910 feet, we get to a market rent per annum of $479,720, and that works out to $12.02 per foot. As we've established, the actual vacancy in this building tends to run somewhere between 11 to 15%. So we are accepting the vacancy rate of 13%. It's exactly in line with the actual performance, and it's supported by market. So no issue there. We calculated the CAM and tax as of 2023 at $14.91. That's based on our square footage. If you use the higher square footage, it goes to, if you use the higher square footage, it goes to $16. So it's running anywhere between $14.91 to $16. We've applied $14. So any prudent purchaser could very easily do that calculation and recognize that a $10 shortfall is too low for this building. Based on our capitalization rate study, we have 3 Bs. I'll broadly call them Bs. One of them is they're all superior, but they are, sorry, let me just grab my too many cap studies here. If we look at the indices, and Mr. Slaughter has rightly pointed out, we have sales, real sales, much superior building on Carlton, far superior, selling at $126 a foot with a 7.48 cap. We have a B minus or C plus on Carlton. That sells with a cap rate of 8.7%. And then, of course, we have Main Street, slightly different, but that cap rate is at 8.18%. So ultimately, our conclusions are very well supported by these sales. You might find that ultimately the cap rate, once blended with the parking cap rate, tends to be on the lower side, but the resulting value is fair and if not optimistic. So for the main holding, the income stream of the main holding, we've used 7.75%. I've provided you with a full downtown parking study. I've mentioned a number of times that the assessor has not provided any information regarding how that 4.5% cap rate for the parking income was developed. It's my belief the cap rate for the parking, as it serves the main holding, ought to be the same. However, for the purpose of this exercise, we have isolated it in the interest effectively of narrowing our issues. We've not disputed the effective market income for the 22 stalls, but we have used 5.5%. So you've all been provided with the downtown parking study. There are 6 sales with a median of 5.44 and an average of 5.48, with a sale on the low of 4.65 and on the high at 6.04. So ultimately, we are applying 5.5% for these downtown parking lots as a general comment. However, I would suggest that there's a very reasonable argument to be made that if this property were to sell, it would indeed sell as one single economic unit, and it's not simply an adjacent or congruent parking lot, but rather one that is where the parking rings around the building. So they're not separable, for lack of a better term. So when we use that 5.5 cap rate on the parking and the 7.75 on the main holding, our blended overall cap rate is actually 7.57. That's quite low. However, the resulting value of $4,670,000 is well supported. Might be on the high side, but ultimately we don't want to over adjust. We want to be fair. So it's my position, Madam Chair, based on our calculation on page 19, that the value for this property at the reference date, given everything we know about the market and the sales universe for downtown office, ought not to exceed $4,670,000. I've included some of the income expense and other data. However, I haven't put much weight on it because it is, all of those rents are, would have to be discounted or adjusted or disqualified based on the fact that they're not net leases and they're not arm's length, and in some cases they're based on premises that are occupied by the owner. So ultimately, we're very comfortable with our value today of $4,670,000. And with that, I'm happy to take your questions, and I thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Scheibel, do you have any questions for Mr. Story?
Yes, please. Let's open page 19. Your potential income, $500,000, correct?
Potential net market income is 500,840. That's correct.
So it's as you did your evaluation, you did your assessment site specific, correct?
We looked, yeah, well, we had to because we don't have appropriate market rents in the property. It would be erroneous to use gross rents. It would be wrong to use owner-occupied spaces. So we had to look to the market, and as I mentioned a number of times here, we have good rents right across the street in some cases, and so we feel very good and very supported in the rents that we've applied. And in some cases, we've used rents that are actually higher than what's being reported as we're deferring to market on a site-specific basis. Yes.
Let's open page 24 and look income expenses Miller, site specific. So total, we're looking on up to date actual. So rental revenue 1.2 million, correct? Everyone with me?
These are gross rents, Ms. Scheibel. We've established this a number of times.
You also can see that parking revenue reported separate 145,000, correct?
Parking revenue is consolidated with 84 Carlton, as we've mentioned, and that's indicated on the income expenses on every single one that's been submitted to the city.
Your estimated net operating income around 353,000, correct?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Your net operating income, 353,000, roughly on page 19. Let's look on page 26. Net operating income, ATD actual, 634,000. Why you don't use specific site-specific net operating income?
So again, these are gross, semi-gross rents, and rents that are non-arm's length. That's the first clue that we should not defer to those. Secondly, we're doing a fee simple analysis, not a lease fee analysis. I believe that's come up a number of times. So when we don't have clean rents in the property, then we have to look to market, and that's precisely what we've done.
But this net operating income, they have a gross lease. They take out all expenses, completely all expenses, any capital investment, and they have net operating income over 600,000.
Right, and we also have a number of parties that are related to the ownership.
And your net operating income 50% less. How so?
Well, I don't think either of us have used the gross rents in determining the rental rate or the NOI, and I think we've established now a number of times. I'll say it again. These rents are not to be relied on in terms of valuing this property. Nobody in the market who was looking at this property would look at these rents, these gross rents, or these owner-occupied or non-arm's length leases and consider them true indicators of value.
But my question specific net operating.
Right, I think I've answered it.
It's 600,000. You apply 50% less. You didn't use site-specific assessment. You just undervalued subject property, correct?
No, absolutely not. We've looked to the market to determine appropriate rental rates, and we've disqualified property or inputs where they are where they are gross, semi-gross, owner-occupied, or related to the owner.
I don't talk about net rent. I talk about net operating income. How lost and what happened in the property site-specific.
Those are not market rents. That's the first problem.
We don't take about market rents. All these gross rents, what reported to us, they took all expenses to manage this building, to provide space. And they came across that they still plus 600,000. It's net operating income when we after apply our capitalization rate. So net operating income, site specific, how you assess this property.
Okay, so have you
how you
stabilized out
evaluate
the
this
operating
property.
costs? Have you stabilized
Okay,
out any
guys.
of these?
All right.
Yeah.
I'm stopping you. You guys, let's take turns speaking. It's hard for panel members. Okay. No interrupting each other. Okay. Mr. Story? Answer the question.
I think, yes, no, once again, we've not relied on these statements as they are not reliable indicators of market value. As I've mentioned, these are not clean rents. These are gross or semi-gross, they're owner occupied, or they are related to the ownership. So in that situation, we have to look to the market to determine appropriate rents for the tenants, for the tenancies, and we've done just that. So I said this a number of times, but that is our position, and I'm very comfortable with that.
It's part of income approach. You find a potential rent and you take all expenses, how we came across net operating income before we capitalize it, correct?
I'm sorry. The parking income?
No. You use market evidence to create to deliver effective gross income. Also, you took out all expenses for income approach, and you came to net operating income that 50% less that reported to us. How so?
Okay,
so Ms. Scheibel, you've asked, sorry, I'm interrupting. I'm sorry, my apologies, but this question has been asked already several times, and I believe it's been answered.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Arnell, do you have any questions for Mr. Story?
Yeah, just on this page 15, your comparables.
Yes.
What did you say about the Broadway ones, which would be good comparables, but you mentioned something about them.
Yeah, so there's so the first two would be considered outliers, right? So that 1850 and the 421, we wouldn't look at those. Those would give us some pause. Those are probably not indicative of market. There's something going on there where we wouldn't put much weight on them. However, the bottom three, I've made a red line here, so it's easier for me to follow. But if you look at the 379 Broadway, Mr. Arno, the first two, those net rents are either very high or very low. So I wouldn't suggest that the rent ought to be $18 or some such thing, or $4. However, we see that we have rents starting in 19, 20, and 21, and they run between $10.50 a foot and $12.34 a foot.
Yeah. Okay. I see that.
Yeah. So there are those that we looked at, and of course we are suggesting to you that this is an OFC, a C-class building. I don't think there's any dispute about that, except for how the cap rate was applied by the city or by the model or whatever. The other OFC indicators are the Marshall Wells building that's in the East Exchange. That's closer to the bottom, 136 Market. And those rents run from, call it, $11 to $14, averaging $12.56 per foot. I've mentioned that I think that the East Exchange is superior in terms of desirability to Broadway. And then finally, Rory Street, the assessor has included those rents as well. That's the Northern Electric building. Again, that's a historic building in the East Exchange, and that's a bit of a it's a bit unique because there are some it's an older historic building with 2 floors built atop, but those rents are averaging $12.80. So my position is effectively that the rents on Broadway are a better indicator than the OFC rents in our chart in the East Exchange. The East Exchange, and that's borne out by those averages of call it $12.60 to $12.80 in the East Exchange. And then the rents on Broadway are averaging $11.45. So from my perspective, sir, that supports our $12.02 overall blended rent based on those rents right across the street.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Warren, do you have any questions for Mr. Story?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, nor do I. All right, we are down to, sorry, give me 1 second. The last matter on the docket. Does anyone require a brief recess before we proceed?
Yes, please.
Yes,
Okay,
please,
we'll
Madam Chair.
for sure. So we'll take a few minutes, please. Thank you very much. We are now on number 8 on this afternoon's docket, 379 Cumberland Avenue. Ms. Scheibel, please proceed.
File number 24-1701, roll number 130-527-58200. We assess 2025 years with reference day April 1st, 2023 at 1,527,000. The subject property office building, 2-floor office building, original built in 1956 with addition 1962, with effective years built 1971. It's situated of land area of 6,386 square feet with plan area 4,217. Gross floor area and leasable area together 8,434 square feet. The subject property lease showed income expense mailer $12 per square foot. The subject property located northwest of the city has a regular shape of land on page number 3. On page number 4, it's a wrong building I showed because it's 2-floor building, only less than 10,000 square feet. Sorry about it. You can cross photo. The subject property on page number 5 has zoning D, downtown living sector, intend to enhance its primary residential areas. Use of buildings extend to be primary residential. The built form range from 2-story century home to low-rise walk-up apartment to high-rise condominium. Urban design review is tend to enhance the pedestrian environment. So it is its 2-floor building, less than 10,000 square feet. On page 6, you can see our income summary. We assess 8,434 square feet at $12.87, give us potential rent 108,546. On same page, I presented evidence on Fort Garry, Donald Graham, Kennedy Smith. I already talked previous cases. For subject property, it's the office under less than 4-story. We apply across the city 11% vacancy loss to be consistent with our assessment and fair. Expenses not recoverable 3%. Shortfall $8 per square foot for occupied vacant space. All this information is statistical crunch number by information provided to us. Give us net operating income 86,286. For subject property, model generate 5.65%. Capitalization rate give us estimation of 1,527,000. On page number 8, capitalization rate table. On page number 10, started income expense mailer provided to us. And you can see we have existing net rent on page 12 at the building with estimated rent $12 per square foot. So my rent comparables, we already talked about them. In last page 19, our 2025 property assessment notice. So based on evidence in my report, the April 1st, 2023 market value of subject property is $1,527,000. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Mr. Slaughter, do you have any questions for the assessor?
No, I think it would be the same questions as before, so that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Arnell?
No questions, thanks.
Ms. Warren?
None. Thank
Nor
you.
do I. Okay, Mr. Slaughter, please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So again, we'll go straight up to page 6 and 7. There's a photograph of the subject property. I had inspected the property about 2 weeks ago. It's the tenancy is a dental lab, but that is not to be confused with a dental office. This is a rather Spartan finish office kind of storage building where they do prosthetics for dentures and such. Over 2 stories. There's not a proper elevator. There's only a one-person lift between the first and second floor. And it's located directly across from Central Park in downtown Winnipeg. Originally constructed in 1956, in addition in 1962, and the property is not sprinklered. So we go through the same analysis as I described before. We would consider this a Class C property. And so on page 16, we look at various rents of C and D properties. And our conclusions are that the Cs would probably be in the $12 up to $14 in the best circumstances. This would not be that case for the reasons I just mentioned. I should point out there's a number of comparisons here, and if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer. But there was some questions around the very first 2. And I thought now, I don't think it's germane to this, but I would just mention them. They are both leased by Don's Photo. And basically, they only needed the front 1,700 square feet, I think it was. And the landlord wanted to keep the rent at a retail rate that was $18, but basically said you can have the back portion. It's still got windows and access, but for a much lower rent. So really, we should be looking at this as a blended rent, which would be about $11 or $12 a foot. Otherwise, as I mentioned, the comparisons show a range about $12 to $14. I think the subject would be at the lower end of that range for various reasons. The second story without a proper elevator, non-sprinklered, certainly the location is a factor, and there's really no parking. There's just enough room for about 6 cars at the back, and staff actually have to pay for parking on a separately assessed nearby lot. When I was inspecting the property, actually, on page 17, I was standing at the back taking a picture. There's a couple of photographs in the appendix as well. But I was standing at the back and I turned around and I saw the property that you see in the picture here, which is actually 395 Notre Dame. So it's kind of right across the street. And I thought, oh, I know that property as well because we represent it. So I went and verified the rent on that property for main floor only, newer build and with parking. And it's $9.95 a foot. So now we have the comparisons ranging from, it would probably be around 12 based on the market. Best comparison across the street is at just under 10. The subject property itself is leased in the reference date from 2018 to 23 for $10 a foot. Now, as Ms. Shable points out, it steps up or it goes to a new lease in 23, but that's in October. I mean, that is now getting really past the reference date, and I feel uncomfortable having that in evidence at all. But that is the truth. It goes to $12. In any event, we looked at all the evidence, including the actual leases, and we selected $11 a square foot as our market rent. So we're a little bit lower than the city on that. Otherwise, we have no contentions with the other rates or allowances, and we come to our capitalization rate. I've gone through our study. I described how Class C has a floor of 7.75% according to us and according to the data. And we would typically apply that in this case. But because we're accepting a higher than typical vacancy allowance, which is still under the market for this type of property, but because we're accepting a favorable vacancy allowance as applied, we will reduce our capitalization rate, the same as we did with the last property I discussed, to 7%. I should point out that, again, the math is the same. If we used a 6% or 5% vacancy allowance, that would be the same as a 7.75% cap rate as it would if we used 11% vacancy allowance and a 7% cap rate. And I should also point out that never does the market apply zero vacancy. Even Altus, when we do a capitalization rate or when we derive a cap rate from a property that has a single tenant, we still apply the market vacancy, a minimum market vacancy of 6. So we're being completely consistent with our methodology. And we ask the board then on page 20 to consider our slightly revised market rent and our revised capitalization rate of 7%. Again, there is nothing at all in evidence to support 5.65%, especially considering this property's site-specific characteristics. So using our rates and allowances, we have a revised value, Madam Chair, of $1,038,000, and that completes our presentation.
Thank you very much. Ms. Shable, do you have any questions for Mr. Slaughter?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Arnell.
No questions, thanks.
Ms. Warren?
None, thanks.
Nor do I. Okay. Well, is there a need for a brief summary from either party?
No, thank
I'm good. Thank you.
All right. Well, we have heard all the items scheduled, and this hearing is now adjourned. So good evening, everybody.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
I'll go shut us down, Madam Chair. Just a moment,
Thank you.
please.
Thank you.